going to start this meeting. This is the Sandag Board of Directors meeting. It's Friday, March 12 at 2021. And we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. So please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so as we get started today, just as a reminder for the members of the public who wish to speak, please raise your hand as soon as the item has started, so that we can make sure and call on you. And also, we have a lot of information to cover today, and we're losing some of our panelists at 11. So we need to be starting our item 8B at 10, which is scheduled from 10 to 11. So with that, we'll get started with non-agenda public comments. Do we have any?
Yes, Chair, we do have Miguel Aguirre from the public, followed by Chris. Miguel, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and start whenever you're ready. You'll have 3 minutes.
Good morning. Miguel Aguirre representing Grand Central West, McDonald's Trolley Station in San Isidro, and also the Border Fusion Group. The Border Fusion Group has sponsored high-level studies with the North American Research Partnership and the Urban Land Institute, focused on the urban fabric straddling port of entry communities, namely San Isidro, Tijuana. We currently support the World Design Capital Year 2024 competitive bid. We believe San Diego Tijuana is poised to win and host this prestigious year-long showcase award. No U.S. city has ever won, and no binational region has ever even applied. I have structured my 2-minute comments in 2 parts and hope to have the opportunity to speak again between items 8, discussion presentation, and funding strategies. Last night, I very much enjoyed Sandag's Central Hub conference and discussion elements focused on its urban and corridor areas of influence. As a 62-year native San Diegan, growing up in La Jolla, Pacific Beach, Linda Vista, and a local grad of Kearney High, Mesa Junior College, and Point Loma College, I'm very familiar with this prime core of San Diego. I love the vision of the Grand Central Hub concept. And as a first-generation Mexican-American, I have lost no passion for our binational region and the cultural ties we have with Mexico. On the contrary, perhaps this is why I am concerned that as a region, we may be failing to leverage unique funding opportunities related to cross-border human capital and fiercely competitive global trade economics. The evolution and ecology of our binational region is inextricably linked. I realize it is difficult to conduct planning and group discussions that embrace this broader context, yet the cross-border evidence permeates our daily lives in every way. We are not any other U.S. city removed hundreds or thousands of miles away from Mexico. We should honor our rich history. I look forward to completing my public comment in item 8. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. And next is Chris, followed by Huang Cao.
Good morning,
Chris,
folks. Thank you. Good morning, folks. Chris Sotomayor, they, them, Eje with Mid-City Can. I wanted to really briefly uplift to you folks the MTS Board's decision yesterday regarding proposed fare changes. MTS and our community is so excited about the choice to reduce youth bus passes by half, and also to add that additional no-cost transfer. We are so excited about the decisions that the MTS Board is making toward progress and a more equitable San Diego. And with that said, we also want to stress that that is just the beginning, and that we highly urge folks to please include youth opportunity passes in the new regional transportation plan. There is no way toward equity in transportation and also toward a greener San Diego unless we implement youth opportunity passes. So we urge you folks to include that program, and we thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Next will be Huang Cao. You can go ahead and start when you're ready, and this will be our last public comment on this item, Chair.
Hi, so my name is Fong Kao. I'm currently an intern at Mississippi Can too, like Chris. I'm calling in to oppose any potential fare increase now or in the near future. While we do support MTS reduction of youth one-way fare and an additional transfer at no cost, it is only the beginning in ensuring equitable transportation access for all San Diegans. If you are potentially thinking about increasing fare costs, we can tell you it does not align with our interests of this community or with the incredible step towards progression, equity, and a greener San Diego that MTS has already accomplished. I urge you to support the implement of Youth Opportunity Pass, no cost transit passes for youth 24 and under, as this is the critical investment in equitable and sustainability. Thank you for listening.
So Sandai Clerk, is that the end of public comments?
Yes, that will conclude public comments.
Okay, I'd like to call on Carlos Diaz de Leon Moncada to do his interpretation.
Good morning and thank you, Mayor. The following will be an announcement in Spanish for how to use the interpretation, and I will then repeat it in English. Muy buenos días, está ofreciendo interpretación simultánea para esta sesión. Para hacer uso del servicio, por favor desplácese a la parte inferior de su pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles, y haga clic en el icono de interpretación. Parece un globo terráqueo. Y seleccione Spanish, español como su idioma. Again, we will have simultaneous interpretation. My apologies for this meeting. To use the feature, please scroll down to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon. It looks like a little world. And then select English as your language. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I will call on Councilmember Jack Hsu.
Good morning. I want to actually propose, but also just simply place into next meeting, next SANDAG board meeting on the 26th, a resolution from a member. This resolution will address a number of things with regards to our new regional transportation plan. It's going to address health outcomes, address issues of some of our most disadvantaged communities. It's going to address the climate action plans of our local cities that the new RTP will have to address. And to set a goal of 30% greenhouse gas reductions by 2035, a rate structure that's going to support ridership in our transit system, a integrated transportation system in which we'll have transit systems competitive with automobile travel. And we're going to support our workers in construction and with training systems and high quality careers through project labor agreements. And we want our plan, our future plan, to also support our biodiversity and natural habitats in our region. And we'll do so by land use management and supporting mitigation measures such as multiple species conservation plan and habitat planning area, habitat conservation in certain plan areas. This is a resolution that I hope I work with the SANDAG staff on and other members of this board, and we'll have it before us and help guide our next regional transportation plan to one that will really help us with transportation, economy, and really move us forward. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Hsu. Now Gustavo Delarda from Caltrans.
Thank you, Mayor Blakespear, and good morning, board members. I'd like to make two quick announcements. I know we have a big agenda, so I'll keep my comments very quickly. The first one is that Caltrans in the last few days released the new strategic plan for our organization, which will guide us over the next 4 years. So I'd like to share our new vision, mission, and goals with you. Our new vision is a brighter future for all through a world-class transportation network. Our new mission is to provide a safe and reliable transportation network that serves all people and respects the environment. And our goals are safety first, cultivating excellence, enhancing and connecting the multimodal transportation network, strengthening stewardship and driving efficiency, leading climate action, and advancing equity and livability in all communities. The second announcement that I wanted to make is related to our California State Transportation Agency unveiling on Wednesday the draft climate action plan for transportation infrastructure. This plan outlines key investment strategies for investing billions of discretionary transportation dollars to aggressively combat and adapt to climate change while supporting public health, safety, and equity. The plan has 10 guiding principles. It builds towards an integrated statewide rail and transit network. It proposes to invest in networks of safe and accessible bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. It includes investment in light, medium, and heavy-duty zero-emission vehicle infrastructure. It strengthens the commitment to social and racial equity by reducing public health and economic harms and maximizing community benefits. It makes safety investments to reduce fatalities and severe injuries to all users towards zero death. It assesses physical climate risk for transportation infrastructure projects. It promotes projects that do not substantially increase passenger vehicle travel, promotes compact infill development while protecting residents and businesses from displacement, proposes to develop a zero-emission freight transportation system, and it proposes to protect natural and working lands. The draft plan is available for feedback through May 4th, and there will be a public workshop on May 18th, for which you can register if you go to the CalSTA website. Those are my announcements. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. And I'll also just add to the Caltrans announcement that Caltrans and other partners did the first Tarp Your Load event, trying to reduce the amount of trash on the freeway by encouraging people driving to the landfill to tarp their loads. That I participated in that. It was very successful, and that people were open to receiving them and hearing the message. And I was happy with the organization fought by the partners and governmental entities. So just wanted to recognize that good work. Mayor Jones.
Thank you, Mayor Blakespear. Chair Blakespear, I'm sorry about that. Anyway, I just wanted to make sure that after our 2% raises that were approved during the last meeting, after that is done and completed, I'd like to make sure that our auditor does an audit to make sure that we're following the policy changes and recommendations that she had recommended in her audit regarding the pay increases, so that there is equity in the pay increases. So I just wanted to bring that to staff and the board's attention, please. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I don't see any other hands up for comments, so we will move forward. Let's see. Yes, so one announcement. I was pleased to participate yesterday in the ceremony for the 14th Street Greenway project. It was a ribbon cutting, and Sandag contributed $1 million to help create a park linking San Diego City College to Barrio Logan and connecting several existing and future park sites into a 10-acre public open space network. It was also a really cool project to see, because it created a connection between that part of the city's industrial past and its future. So there were photographs and industrial artifacts and a really interesting interpretive signs. I thought it was a really great display there. And I want to congratulate Mayor Gloria, Civic San Diego, and all the other agencies and staff that helped to make this project a reality. I also want to announce that I've appointed Councilmember Zito to serve as the chair of the Audit Committee and Mayor Vasquez to serve as his vice chair. So we'll be posting applications in the near future for the public member positions. Stay tuned for additional updates at our next meeting. And do we have any other member comments or public comments, Francesca?
No hands from the public, Chair.
Okay, I see Mayor Gasterland.
Okay, unmute myself. I think I'm unmuted now. Very, very quick announcement. As many know, we had a bluff slide in Del Mar 2 Sundays ago, and they'll be working on it this weekend. And we're trying to get the word out to everyone who visits Del Mar's bluffs and beaches. Please stay at least 50 feet away from the slide location. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, anyone else? Okay, so we'll go to Hassan for the Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Chair Blakespear. Good morning, Vice Chair Mayor Gloria, Second Vice Chair Stella Solis. Good morning to all of you. Few things to update you on. Recently, as Mayor Castellan just mentioned, the Del Mar Bluff experienced a serious collapse. It happened south of 4th Street in Del Mar. Large section of the bluff and a 1912 returning wall came down. North County Transit District stopped passenger and rail services. After a thorough review was conducted by NCTD, operation on the track reopened under a slow speed. Passenger trains are operating at 15 miles per hour, freight trains at 10 miles per hour. During the next 2 weekends, the tracks will be closed to stabilize this bluff and to work on other rail projects along the corridor. We will clear loose soil, grade, and prepare the site for extensive structural repairs. Today in item 7 on the agenda, you are asked to ratify emergency action that I have taken to address the Del Mar Bluff failure. This will best prevent any further impacts to the track or at the beach level. 12 days have passed since the bluff collapse, and we now believe that repairs will likely be in the $10 million range. To be very clear, the actions that you are asked to ratify in the action today are pursuing and accepting state funding for the emergency repair to the greatest extent possible and applying any state funds received to the emergency repair project. Accepting $500,000 from NCTD, thank you NCTD, and applying those funds to the project budget. Authorize the Del Mar Bluffs Phase 4 contractor, Blue Pacific Engineering and Construction, to perform emergency repair on a sole source basis, and authorizing the execution of a right of entry permit with state parks needed to access the repair site, and authorizing the CEQA exemption that state parks will require as part of that. Each step will allow us to quickly address the slope failure and in the best way assure the safe continuation of rail services and the safety of beach users. We will continue to coordinate with our partners, NCTD, the City of Del Mar, California State Parks, the Commission, the California Coastal Commission, and the Sheriff's Department to ensure beachgoers are aware of the danger this collapse presents. Sandbag and its partners have posted signs, hired the Sheriff Department to patrol the top of the bluff and continue to remind beachgoers and pedestrians not to walk on the bluff within 50 feet of them. We also worked with Chairwoman Pinto of the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association to schedule a site visit to determine if cultural resources were unearthed. The Del Mar Bluff is a mile-long stretch of the Los Angeles corridor, the second busiest corridor in the nation. It is absolutely necessary that we move the track inland off the bluff as soon as we can. We have a study underway, and Sandag crews are conducting geotechnical boring in Del Mar and San Diego to guide our efforts. This is critical for safety, economic prosperity, and goods movement and passenger mobility. And let me just mention, oftentimes people say long-term is going to take a long time and cost a lot of money. Yeah, absolutely true on both points, but this is needed for the region, for the economic viability of the region, for the safety of our residents. The need for a reliable Los Angeles corridor is why I was asked to testify at a state legislative hearing this week. I talked about Los Angeles' importance as part of the state goals around high-speed rail and transit. With the state budget coming up, legislators are spending a lot of time thinking about where it makes the most sense to invest rail dollars based on where we can get the most benefit from those investments. I emphasize the key role that the Los Angeles corridor plays as the backbone of the rail system for Southern California, and express the urgency in moving the rail tracks off the Del Mar Bluff. We will continue to work with our partners to continue this conversation, and more importantly, find the funding to get this done. COVID-19 Year in Review Economic Report. Even though it might be hard to believe, it has been a year since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic, and the stay-home order was issued in California. As we approach this milestone, our data and economic teams have developed a Year in Review Economic Report with you, which you will receive. You received yesterday afternoon. And if you didn't, please let us know. The report analyzes data from the past 12 months to provide insight into what recovery might look like for the San Diego region as the pandemic continues and vaccines start to be distributed more widely. Let me talk a little bit about the Digital Divide Task Force and the Digital Equity Bill of Rights. The pandemic shows us that access to the internet is vital to our region's livelihood. People need to be connected to be able to access opportunities, education, and healthcare. In January, the board adopted a resolution memorializing your commitment to bridging the digital divide. For this region, we hope you will consider adopting resolutions in each of your jurisdictions. Our clerk provided a sample resolution in an earlier email. The email includes information about the Digital Equity Bill of Rights, which is an effort from California Emerging Technology Fund. The Digital Equity Bill of Rights has 10 fundamental principles for policymakers to consider. SANDAG signed the Digital Equity Bill of Rights. We encourage each of you to do the same. You can learn more by going to the website. Digital divide is also an equity issue, a social equity issue that we must address as a region. And we're working with our large MPOs in the state, our partners, and with Caltrans to look at potential funding sources to make sure we move this digital divide resolution into action. Last night, SANDAG and Caltrans held a virtual public meeting for the Central Mobility Hub, what I call San Diego Grand Central. There were more than 180 participants. At the meeting, we presented initial concept for the Central Mobility Hub. This Central Mobility Hub is a significant component of this plan, which will develop transportation solution for the Midway District, Old Town, and downtown San Diego. This hub is a great economic strategy for the region. The Central Mobility Hub is a key component of the 2020 Regional Transportation Plan. If you're not able to join us, we would still like your feedback. Please visit our virtual engagement site to learn more about the Central Mobility Hub. And finally, the Mid-Coast Trolley updates. The Mid-Coast Car project continues to progress on schedule to provide 9 stations along the UC San Diego Blue Line trolley. Last week, I visited the future Balboa Avenue Transit Center and was so impressed by what I saw. Our hardworking crews have constructed a beautiful new station along the Marina Corridor. Personally, I can't wait to see the rest of it. This summer, we will begin testing the trolleys, and I'm hopeful that many of you will be able to join us in previewing the exceptional trolley extension. Madam Chair, this concludes my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. And just to encourage concise comments from board members, because we need to get started on the first panel to then get started on the second panel at 10. Council
I think you
member,
are muted.
I'm muted?
No, we hear you. We hear you.
Okay, so I'll start with the first hand that came up was Chair Kranz from NCTD.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and just wanted to add my thanks to the staffs of both North County Transit District and Sandag for their quick efforts to address the emergency that exists on the Del Mar Bluffs. We certainly were not unaware of the challenge that we have with the Del Mar Bluffs. We're currently, advancing plans for Del Mar Bluff stabilizations projects 5 and 6. And it was in fact a collapse a couple of years ago that really got us focused on that and engaging with the California Transportation Commission and the State Division of Rail to advance the stabilization projects 5 and 6. This emergency caught us, we did need to come up with a few more resources, but both agencies and the state have responded very well. And I appreciate all the efforts at advancing the projects for these emergency measures. So as Mayor Gasterlin mentioned, people should stay clear of the area and be sure to stay 50 feet away from the bluffs in that full mile stretch because they can collapse at any time. And we are just going to continue to work as quickly as we can to stabilize them in a way that will allow this board to consider how to move the tracks inland. So thanks again to both staffs.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Minto.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I appreciate the fact that we're moving so quickly on this. Hassan, good job on that. Staff, good job. I know that as we've been having some failures over there, we've talked many times about our safety of our community. I guess I have an interesting question though, because I know this is very expensive. We've talked about that in the past. Is there any kind of, or any of the agencies, do they have any stop loss insurance, or is there even any kind of program like that out there for agencies with these kinds of infrastructure? I know many of us have it for like if a corrugated metal pipe or some other sewer type thing or water, main breaks. Is there anything for this and that could help us maybe, pay for some of this? And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Minto. Appreciate your comment. I wish there is, but there isn't. We asked the California Transportation Commission to put it on the agenda. There is funding for that. The question is, would we have what probably will be about $10 million? That's yet to be seen, but we would hope that between the state agencies and our partners here locally in CTD, that will be able to secure the funding, but there is no such insurance that could pay for the repairs, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. That was a good question. Mayor Gasterlin.
Thank you. So this bluff fall is 1 block from my home, where of course in COVID times, I'm pretty much 100% of the time. I'm really familiar with this part of the bluff, including 7th Street as well as 4th Street. So my question is going to be, what will be the geology analysis be like? But I want to preface my question with, my understanding is that this part of the bluff has been one that was considered very low risk. It has no pilings in it right now. Pilings with tiebacks have gone into all the high risk areas that were known of the Del Mar Bluffs. And what we know is that when these pilings go in, the water that percolates through the bluffs shifts where it goes and where it emerges. The 7th Street pilings that went in several years ago are a good example. There were 2 places that opened up that are now full of bamboo on the bluffs, because they become these little oases where the water is now coming out and did not before the pilings went in. So I say that to point out that when the pilings go in that are going to cost this $10 million south of 4th Street, new places are likely to get wet because that's what's happened before. So I really hope that the $10 million includes very careful analysis by bluff erosion experts and geologists. So I'll mention that Adam Young at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography has fantastic data, LIDAR data that bounces light off the bluffs. And that data includes in it the means to analyze where the bluff is chronically wet and where the bluff is chronically dry. So I truly hope that that kind of analysis will be built into these repairs.
Okay, Mayor Gasterlin, I think we need to.
That's my question, and I want to end with a compliment. Hassan, your team has been fantastic in getting to this fix. So I'm curious about the geology.
Thank you, Mayor. I just say the geologists will continue to do their work and will continue to inform you of their conclusion. But I do want to just highlight that just to make sure that I don't come back to you later and say you told us. The $10 million is an estimate. We originally thought it's going to cost less. It could be more. And I also want to remind all of you what I said several times. We can predict where we need to stabilize, but this is nature, and you know, you can fight nature, but nature will win at the end of the day. That's why I keep emphasizing the need to look at long-term solution of moving the bluff altogether.
Okay, thank you. Second Vice Chair Sotelo Solis, and then we'll go to our consent calendar. We can't hear you. We still can't hear you. Okay, we'll come back to you for comments later. Okay, so in front of us, we have a consent calendar, and I would entertain a motion.
Pinto, I'll move the calendar.
Huebner, second.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. For the City of Carlsbad, Mayor Hall.
I would like to reconsider item 8. I raised my hand, but my hand's raised, but we haven't called on me.
So you would like to, well, we're not on to 8 yet.
This is Oceanside. I would like to pull item 6. I had my hand raised as well.
Okay, so let's pull item 6 and then vote
pull
on the
item
balance. And 8 is not on consent, so we'll get to 8.
Part of the consent calendar is last week's agenda, isn't it not? Or last month's agenda? And I want to reconsider item 8 in last month's agenda. It's part of the consent calendar.
Okay, are you talking about maybe approval of meeting minutes, item 3?
Item 3, the approval of the minutes in last agenda, part of the consent calendar was item 8, was I think item 8 through item 13. And I would like to make a motion to re-pull item 8 for discussion.
Okay.
It was the legislative platform.
And I would second that motion.
Okay, I'm just trying to manage the agenda that's in front of us. I understand you're referencing other numbers. So I think what you're saying is that we'll pull item 3, which is approval of meeting minutes. And then Rodriguez wanted to pull item 6, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and so we'll vote on the balance and then we'll return to each of those. So let's do that.
Motion to approve the balance.
I think
Mayor
we already
Jones?
had a motion. We're just modifying that. So that maybe the clerk could refer us to, or the attorney, who was it who made the original motion and the second?
That was Minto, and I actually accept that amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I had the motion by Mayor Minto and the second by Mayor Huebner.
Okay, great.
Okay, so for the balance of the consent calendar for the City of Carlsbad, Mayor Hall.
Aye.
The City of Chula Vista is absent. The City of Coronado, Mayor Bailey.
Yes.
For the County of San Diego, Supervisor Lawson Reamer.
Aye.
Thank you. For the City of Del Mar, Mayor Gasterlin.
Aye.
For the City of El Cajon, Mayor Wells.
Yes.
For the City of Encinitas, Chair Blakespear.
Yes.
Thank you. For the City of Escondido, Mayor McNamara.
Aye.
For the City of Imperial Beach, Councilmember Spriggs.
Aye.
For the City of La Mesa, Councilmember Shu.
Aye.
For the City of Lemon Grove, Mayor Vasquez.
Yes.
For the City of National City, Second Vice Chair Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, aye.
For the City of Oceanside, Councilmember Rodriguez.
Rodriguez, yes.
For the City of Poway, Mayor Voss.
Aye.
For the City of San Diego, Vice Chair Gloria.
Aye.
For the City of San Marcos, Mayor Jones.
Jones, yes.
For the City of Santee, Mayor Minto.
Minto, yes.
For the City of Solana Beach, Mayor Hebner.
Hebner, yes.
For the City of Vista, Mayor Ritter.
Ritter, yes.
Thank you. And that does pass with those members present.
Okay, thank you. So let's go to each of these items and deal with them. So item number 3 was Mayor Hall. Could you repeat what it is you're looking for?
Last meeting, part of the consent calendar was item 8, the legislative platform. And I'm asking us to reconsider the vote on that. And what I'm specifically have difference with is bullet point 16, which is efforts to lower the current 2/3 voter requirement for special purpose taxes such as transportation and quality of life improvements to a simple majority. That's part of the legislative platform that we voted on. And I'm sorry I missed it last week, but I'm wanting to be reconsidered at this time.
Okay. So maybe the city attorney could weigh, or the Sandag attorney could weigh in here, because my understanding is that revoting on things on this agenda that are not agendized, is that, what would you say to that?
So ultimately what you have here, as it's been stated, is a motion to reconsider. A motion to reconsider is covered by section 37 of Robert's rules. A motion to reconsider is subject to time limits, and a motion to reconsider can be made only on the same day of the vote to be when the item to be reconsidered was taken.
Okay, so it sounds like that's not possible now. So I would entertain a motion on item number 3, approval of meeting minutes.
Sotelo Solis. So
Second. I'm sorry, Chair. I have a question. I didn't see an option to raise my hand on my platform here.
Okay,
This
is that Mayor Bailey?
Coronado Mayor Bailey, yes.
Okay, yeah, I don't see you at all, but go ahead. Is it your questions on this item?
Yes, question for Mr. Kirk. Could you explain the process for a couple of years ago when there was a similar situation where the board was able to reconsider a vote on RENA after it had already been adopted in preceding meetings? Perhaps that's what Mayor Hall from Carlsbad is asking for.
That might be, and there's a separate process, which is to rescind or amend something that has been previously adopted. That may be what you're looking to do. That is covered in a different section. I could go back and I can take a look at what that process was. That in an assembly requires a majority vote when notice of intent was stated previously, or a vote of the majority of the entire membership. So that to rescind the action would be to effectively just undo what was done before, but that would not allow you to take action. You still have a Brown Act issue today about your consideration. I believe that when we looked at this before, that the item had been agendized for consideration at the subsequent meeting, and I don't know if that's the case today.
Okay, thank you. So there was a motion from Mayor Sotelo Solis and a second from Mayor Gloria on approval of meeting minutes. So let's go ahead and vote on that.
Thank you. For the city of Carlsbad, Mayor Hall.
No.
For the city of Chula Vista, the city of Chula Vista is absent. For the city of Coronado, Mayor Bailey.
Bailey, no.
Thank you. For the county of San Diego, Supervisor Lawson Remer.
I'm just clarifying, we're voting on approval of the consent calendar? Sorry, Catherine, Chair Blakespear.
No, we're voting on the consent calendar passed except for the 2 items that were pulled. So we're voting just on approval of meeting minutes. And that's
Yes, approve minutes.
Thank you. For the city of Del Mar, Mayor Gasterland.
Yes.
Thank you. For the city of El Cajon, Mayor Wells.
No.
For the city of Encinitas, Chair Blakespear.
yes.
Thank you. For the city of Escondido, Mayor McNamara.
Yes.
Thank you. For the city of Imperial Beach, Councilmember Spriggs.
Briggs, yes.
For the city of La Mesa, Councilmember Shu.
Yes.
For the city of Lemon Grove, Mayor Vasquez.
Yes.
For the city of National City, Second Vice Chair Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, aye.
Thank you. For the city of Oceanside, Councilmember Rodriguez.
Rodriguez, no.
For the city of Poway, Mayor Voss.
Aye.
For the city of San Diego, Vice Chair Gloria.
Aye.
Thank you. For the city of San Marcos, Mayor Jones.
No, San Marcos.
For the city of Santee, Mayor Minto.
Minto, yes.
For the city of Solana Beach, Mayor Huebner.
Hebner, yes.
Thank you. And for the city of Vista, Mayor Ritter.
No.
Thank you. And that item does pass with 12 yeses and 5 nos.
Oh, let's see. I'm here now. Mary Salas, yes. For Chula Vista?
Thank you very much. So then I apologize, the count was off there. The tally was 13 yeses and 6 nos.
Okay, thank you. So let's go now to Councilmember Rodriguez, pulled item 6.
Yes, very good. Thank you so much. Just needing some clarification on this from staff. From what I understand, we are extending the current $100 million line of credit with Bank of America that we're paying a servicing fee, annual servicing fee of about $320,000. Staff is asking for an extension of that for an additional $100 million. So that would add an additional $320,000 or $640,000 annually just to service. The interest rate notated was just over an 8 per 63-day cycle. So when I do the math, it's just under 1% annually if it was fully utilized. My first question is rates are trending up. And I don't see any risk forecast on if rates were to, let's say double on these short-term products. How would this impact projects and budgets?
Thank you for the question, Andre Dujon, your CFO. So currently Sandag's portfolio is $2.3 billion and 98% of it is fixed or synthetically fixed. So the commercial paper program is only at 2% of the total amount. The commercial paper program gives not only Sandag flexibility, but mostly our cities who are drawn into the program. In fact, the city of Oceanside has a draw requirement or request, as well as NCTD, the county. Currently, the city of La Mesa and Imperial Beach are in the program as well. So yes, it is a variable rate program. And if interest rates do go up, then the cities who are drawing onto the program would have to bear those costs. But currently, the Federal Reserve has said that they don't expect to increase interest rates, short-term rates for the next year or so. And again, this is a program that usually we try to get the cities and whoever's borrowing to pay within a 5-year period. So there is some risk that interest rates go up, but even when rates were pretty much higher than this 2 years ago, the rates only got up to 2%. And right now our all-in cost is under a 0.5 basis point. So we feel that the risk is fairly low. And again, it's probably the cheapest form of borrowing that we currently have.
Got it. Thank you for that. I'm making an assumption that the 2021 through 2025 project cash flow needs were thoroughly planned in the past by Sandag staff through the last RTIP and RTP planning process. And my next question is what about the agreed upon budgetary appropriations has changed that would require us to extend debt obligations?
Yeah, so Sandag, the commercial paper that we're looking to increase from 100 to 200 million, Sandag doesn't have any borrowing needs in that. We're basically why we're increasing the limit is to accommodate our cities, our member agencies. The NCTD has a fairly large draw coming, the County of San Diego and the City of Oceanside. So it's mostly for those three agencies that we're increasing the limit. It's not for Sandag's purposes.
Okay, very good.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry.
No. I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Okay, is Rebecca, Mayor Jones, is your hand up for this item?
No, sorry about that. I forgot to put it down. My apologies.
Okay, so I would entertain a motion on this item 6.
Move approval.
Was it, okay, Mayor Gloria?
Second. Sotelo Solis, second.
Okay. Sotelo Solis was the one I heard. I think there was someone else, but let's go ahead.
Thank you. For the City of Carlsbad, Mayor Hall.
Aye.
Thank you. For the City of Chula Vista, Mayor Salas.
Yes.
Thank you. For the City of Coronado, Mayor Bailey.
Yes.
For the County of San Diego, Supervisor Lawson Reamer.
Yes.
Thank you. For the City of Del Mar, Mayor Gasterland.
Yes.
For the City of El Cajon, Mayor Wells.
Yes.
For the City of Encinitas, Chair Blakespear.
Yes.
For the City of Escondido, Mayor McNamara.
Yes.
For the City of Imperial Beach, Councilmember Spriggs.
Spriggs, yes.
For the City of La Mesa, Councilmember Shu.
Yes.
For the City of Lemon Grove, Mayor Vasquez.
Yes.
For the City of National City, Second Vice Chair Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, aye.
For the City of Oceanside, Councilmember Rodriguez.
Rodriguez, yes.
For the City of Poway, Mayor Voss.
Aye.
For the City of San Diego, Vice Chair Gloria.
Aye.
For the City of San Marcos, Mayor Jones.
Jones, yes.
For the City of Santee, Mayor Minto.
Minto, yes.
For the City of Solana Beach, Mayor Huebner.
Huebner, yes.
And for the City of Vista, Mayor Ritter.
Ritter, yes.
Thank you, and that does pass unanimously.
Okay, thank you. So with this, we're going to, just because of time, skip until the end, item 8A, which was about data used in the planning process, and that's presented by Sandag staff. So we'll go to item 10B, which is a panel of academic and policy experts. So I will hand it over to staff to introduce this one. I think it's Colleen or Hassan. But wait, hold on a second. I see Mayor Hall has his hand up. Is that a leftover hand?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor Blakespear. Good morning again to all of you. As you know, we are working to turn our vision for a reimagined transportation system into a regional plan, which we'll present to you later this year. This is the second presentation in our series on the topic. Last month, we shared with you the initial results of our modeling, and we are very excited that the 2020 regional plan will create a transportation system that's faster, fairer, and cleaner for the San Diego region. The investment in the plan will optimize traffic flow, improve social equity, and create a greener option for the region, for this generation and for many generations to come. The team has been poring over data for nearly 2 years, and today Sandag is going to do something we have never done before. We are taking a deep dive with you on the assumptions, data, and strategies we are evaluating to develop and fund this transportation plan. It is important to us that we are good stewards of public funds and public trust, and we see this as a critical part of this process. Today, you will hear from some of the smartest people and most well-respected experts in the field of transportation. It is important to hear from other experts as opposed to your staff. Our Chief Economist, Ray Major, will kick off a discussion on data and the planning process, which might happen because of time a bit later. But then our Director of Regional Planning, Colleen Clemenson, will welcome a panel of national experts to discuss financing strategies and best practices. We will conclude with a presentation on the funding tools SANDAG is analyzing for the 2020 regional plan. This is the first for our agency. Never before has SANDAG published so much planning data, more than 20 times the data that's stored in the Library of Congress. And never before has SANDAG created a forum to openly and transparently discuss revenue and financing like we are today. I am very proud of this team and what they have to share. I would now like to introduce our amazing planning director, Colleen Clemenson.
Thank you, Hassan. As Mayor Blakespear mentioned at the beginning, we have a two-part presentation for you regarding the 2021 regional plan. Part A is focused on the vast amount of data that you have requested to see, and this is the data used in the planning process. We are going to move this and kind of switch it up and start with part B of the presentation, which is the cost estimates and funding strategies. And what we have done is brought together an expert panel, experts in the field of pricing strategies. And this is important, and I just want to lay out here for the board of directors that a required part of the regional plan is to have a funding strategy. It's always been a requirement of the plan, and this is something the federal agencies require we have in order to get approval for future funding. And what we have put together in the staff report, and it's included in attachment 2 in the Part B staff report, is a funding strategy. So we've brought together a panel of experts to talk about some of these strategies from their perspective. These are experts in the field that have practiced pricing throughout the nation. They come to us from Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles. And I'm very pleased to introduce to you all, actually someone who needs no introduction, the moderator for this panel, Mr. Haney Hong, who is the executive director of the San Diego County Taxpayer Association. So Haney will introduce the panel, and he has a few questions that he will be asking our esteemed panel members. And then we've reserved about 20 minutes for board members to be able to answer or ask any questions. And then we'll come back, go through the data, and wrap up the presentation here for all of you with the funding strategy and really breaking down the cost estimates of the plan. So with that, if we've got Haney teed up and ready to go, I'll turn it over to you, Haney.
We can't hear you.
Oh, you do?
Now we hear you.
Okay. All right. Radio check satisfactory. So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And I was saying, while you were all reading my lips, trying to eagerly anticipate what it is that I was saying, is that I want to commend the SANDAG staff for inviting yours truly to moderate this panel, because as Hassan knows, as the chief executive of the Taxpayers Association of San Diego, I look at things with skeptical eyes. But all of you trust us at the Taxpayers Association to be the honest broker and on public policy, and to look at things from a data lens and also from a research-driven perspective. I'm pleased to moderate this conversation this morning. The way I see success for all of us is this will be an educational session. I think that what the SANDAG staff have presented to you all for consideration is something that is going to be not inexpensive. Let's just put it that way. And I think that there's going to be a number of questions on how such a plan would get financed. And I think that there is an opportunity for us to talk about the different mechanisms of finance. So I'm going to ask everybody in this conversation, please channel your inner nerd. For those of you who know me, I'm a Stanford engineer and Harvard trained public policy analyst. And so we're all going to do a great job of channeling our inner nerd about how it is that transportation infrastructure can get financed. As Colleen said, we'll spend about 35 to 40 minutes together. I'm going to ask the panelists some questions, and then we'll turn it back over to the chair for questions from members of the board. Joining me, also, I'll start from at least what I see on the right for my Hollywood squares here is Bob Poole, and he is the Director of Transportation Policy at the Reason Foundation. And one thing that may not be in the bio that you all saw is that he's also a co-founder of the Reason Foundation. And so he is MIT trained. So he was just in Kendall Square down the road from where I studied public policy. And I think that Bob here is going to have a lot of great additions today because he's actually the coiner of many of the terms that we use in the transportation world. Next is Professor Michael Manville from UCLA. So for those of you on the board who went to USC, please put your booze to the side. But Professor Manville here is Associate Professor of Urban Planning at the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs. And his research focused primarily on the relationships between transportation and land use and how they interrelate with local public finance. And in preparation for this panel, I scanned a lot of the work done by Professor Manville, done by Michael, and there's a lot of great discussion. I'm looking forward to presenting differing views that exist on our panel today. And then finally, the last, but certainly not least, Hollywood Square before you is Brianne Eby, and she is a senior policy analyst at the Eno Center for Transportation, which is on the East Coast. So thanks for, I said good morning earlier, but for Brianne, it's actually good afternoon because she's in Maryland. And recently her research has addressed transportation's influence on climate and the environment, best practices in congestion pricing, transportation governance, and workforce engagement. And as a part of a nonpartisan independent think tank, kind of like us at the Taxpayers Association, I saw too that Brianne has been quoted recently in many things, especially related to Maryland's transportation system recently. So ladies and gentlemen, I know I can't see you all clap, but I presume you are clapping. Join me in welcoming these panelists. And what I want to do is I want to build some momentum. And I want to start first, ladies and gentlemen, with an inventory of the kinds of ways that transportation infrastructure can get financed. And I'm going to kind of do this rapid fire. So I'm going to ask each panelist to share one, and then we'll talk about some of the positives and negatives later. But I want to just start with an inventory and set the universe and set the stage here for our audience. So Brianne, over to you.
I think I know by now to unmute right from the get-go. Sorry about that. So I'll start with the obvious new taxes. And I don't know if you want me to elaborate on that right now or if we're just listing, but I'll start there.
Type of tax. Maybe you can name one specific type of tax that's used to finance public transportation infrastructure.
Sure. So the obvious would be sales tax. Maybe less popular at this point, at least at the federal level, would be the gas tax. But those are, I guess, two to start us off.
Yeah, sales tax, gas tax. So we'll continue the inventory. I'll move over to Michael.
Sure. Some sort of direct user charge like a toll.
Okay. User charge like a toll. So we got sales taxes, fuel taxes, the user charge like a toll. Let me move over to Bob to keep adding to our inventory.
Well, I'll say a per mile charge done electronically.
So per mile charge. So like how basically, there's devices that can measure how far a car is moving and then can charge based on a per mile. So let's keep going around the horn. Now I'm also testing our panelists' ability to see if they're keeping track themselves. Brianne, what's another type of another mechanism of public finance around transportation infrastructure?
So something else that I think we'll get into more detail today, congestion charge. I think that fits in with what Mike mentioned in terms of a direct user charge, but that's a specific example of that.
Thank you. So this is what's sometimes within the world of usage charges, there are congestion charges or something called a cordon fee that places like Singapore have implemented in the 70s, and London did recently in the 2000s. So that's another example. We'll do two more. Michael, over to you.
You can crank up all the fines and fees related to transportation. You can charge more for traffic tickets and running red lights and parking in the wrong place.
Wonderful. I'm glad that you brought that up because that's going to tee up the next question I have for you all. Bob, let's close out our inventory with you.
Value capture in other words, land values increase in proximity to some kinds of transportation facilities, and generally that increase in value is not tapped for the benefit to help fund transportation.
Well, thanks, sir, folks. So first, just for our audience here, who I can't see you, so I'm hoping you're all smiling or taking down copious notes. But we just did an inventory of the kinds of finance that could be utilized or leveraged in any plan that Sandag would want to execute, right? From something like a sales tax to fuel taxes, usage fees like tolls or cordon fees. Per mile charge, some of the fines that Michael talked about, and value capture through, I'll call them adjacent policy areas. So that leads me to my second question for the panel. So much of what we do or want to do in transportation is driven by user behavior and how people choose to move themselves and goods around a region. So while we have this inventory of things that we've discussed to finance public transportation, are there other, to build off of what Michael said, what are the other fees, charges, policies in adjacent, I'll call it policy areas that affect behavior in a transportation system? I'll start, Bob.
Well, whether something is mandatory or optional is an important factor. People have less resistance if something they have to pay is an option that gives them better service. For example, that's the basic case for express toll lanes, that nobody is required to use them. But if you want to use them, you pay more than you would pay in a gas tax, because you're presumably getting uncongested or less congested and faster and more reliable trips.
Michael, any thoughts on what are other kinds of fees, charges, policies that affect user behavior in the transportation system?
Yeah, there's a lot of complementary, particularly land use policies that matter a lot, that are sort of separate from the transportation system, but really influence whether people want to use different facets of it. So for instance, if you have zoning laws that require parking with everything we build, you sort of nudge people toward driving in a way that you would not if parking was something that was built at the discretion of developers. Things like that. That there's a lot of one of the things we've learned in Los Angeles is that just laying 100 miles of rail over a landscape otherwise designed for automobiles doesn't do much to make people want to ride rail. So you have to think about the land use.
And what's particularly interesting, Michael, about what you're talking about, this is a research area focus of yours, is that in when it comes to Sandag in particular, right, we have a lot of member agencies, and it's the member agencies that control those land use decisions that have an impact on the transportation system's effectiveness. Brianne, any thoughts on what I'm calling adjacent fees, charges, policies that affect user behavior?
Sure. So, and I should say too, my educational background is in behavioral science or experimental psychology. So this is a pet topic of mine, even though it's not my primary work focus right now. So I think of two things when I think of how policy relates to behavior. The first is the provision at least in terms of transportation. So the provision of alternatives. This is sort of in the same vein as what Michael was saying, but you know, in order to understand how people you know, might be willing to take different modes of transportation, we have to have different options available, whether that is you know, shared transportation, active transportation options. So really just a diverse range of transportation or mobility options. The second thing I think of is the use of data to understand travel patterns in the first place. And so, you know, really being able to leverage technology and data to understand how people are using the network and how we might, you know, adapt the network to better serve different needs.
Well, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we've heard so far, just to curate the conversation here, is we have an inventory of mechanisms to finance transportation systems, and it's building and it's maintenance, right? From some of the sales taxes, fuel charges, to the per mile charges, user fees, et cetera. We've also talked about some of the other policy choices made perhaps within other governments or other jurisdictions that could have an impact on how a transportation system works. For instance, land use decisions, or for instance, choices as to whether it's optional or mandatory, as Bob was talking about, and some of the other usage of these things could affect how it is that a transportation system is utilized, and could affect the efficacy of the financing options that folks might have. So let me button up this, I'll call this framing part of the conversation, by now asking our panelists to talk a little bit about what are the hidden, I'm calling them hidden, taxpayer subsidies within transportation. Are there policies or sources of funding at the federal or state level, for instance, that actually subsidize automobile travel or subsidize transit usage? Let's talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to start. I've been rotating who I'm with, so you can guess who I'm going to next. And he pick up, but he put it down just in time. Michael, over to you.
Sure. The transportation system is full of subsidies. You know, the public transportation is heavily subsidized just by its nature by the federal government and by state governments. Most evidently, I think, in the capital costs to start it, and also in efforts to keep fares low, because it is an important social service. Automobiles are subsidized in the fact that they are, you know, most streets in metropolitan areas are valuable lands that as long as you have a car, you're not charged to use. We force developers, as I mentioned, to provide parking spaces, and that's the terminal costs of driving, which should be paid by drivers in most instances, and instead it's paid by property developers. And we don't charge drivers to fully account for the costs they impose through burning gasoline, through imposing delays on other people, and through increasing crash risk. I mean, it's just hard to think of a part of the transportation system that isn't subsidized somehow.
Michael, because you know, one of the things that all of us probably don't really think about is many of us probably get in our car and use the interstate system, the freeway, and no one charges us when we go on there. It's actually free for the most part. And so that's, you know, and that was built through some of the capital investment, but we don't think about that, right? And there are some externalities that perhaps aren't captured. So let me bring into the conversation, Bob, any thoughts here on other areas of subsidies to the transportation system?
All right, well, I'd like to just clarify one point about the interstates in particular. The federal gasoline tax was authorized in 1956 to be the user charge for the interstates, because it was concluded, even though a lot of the eastern ones could have been financed entirely by tolls, that was not true in the South and the West at that point in time in the mid-50s. But the idea was that this would be, even though the federal government was going to pay 90% through the federal fuel tax, 10% coming from state governments, and state governments were presumed to use their gasoline tax as well. So it's not really fair to say that the interstate was subsidized in that sense. The capital costs were met by the federal fuel tax, the 90% at least, from the outset. And that was true until Congress started in the 1980s, diverting increasing portions of the federal fuel tax revenue to transit and other programs. So yes, you could say now that it's partially subsidized. And of course, there are externalities, as Michael mentioned, of emissions and congestion and so forth. But in terms of paying for the costs of the system, it was originally 100% a user pay system.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Bob, and thank you for bringing that up. And I think what's interesting is that for especially our audience today is they're making decisions while a number of policy interventions over time have affected the ability of these different financing mechanisms to fully fund, for instance, the building of certain of infrastructure. So in this particular example that you're using with a fuel efficiency and us getting better at what's coming out of our tailpipes, and hybrid cars, et cetera, that maybe we're not capturing the externalities in the same way that we used to before those user fees. So Brianne, over to you. Any thoughts on other areas where the transportation system, there's, I'll call them hidden subsidies?
I'll be brief because I was going to mention a lot of the points that Michael already brought up. I think commuter subsidies is another example, though, and how parking for commuters, for example, that's often something that is subsidized for people that drive in a way that's not for other types of commuters. So that's just another example.
We've got this inventory of ways that you can finance your plan, right? Or ultimately that's something that you have to think about. We have an understanding of the other things that affect, for instance, user behavior. Okay? And then we've also talked about other aspects of the system that are probably important to consider as you're building a plan of finance. Right? These are the things that where are other either sources of funds or other policies that affect, again, that inventory of potential public finance mechanisms. So this next segment, what I want to do with our exceptionally brilliant panel of speakers here, and I'm so pleased to be to be moderating you guys, but I'm not brilliant like the three of you. I'm just here to be the court jester, I suppose, is that let's talk now about the pluses and minuses of each of these different types of public financial mechanisms to build transportation systems. And what I'm gonna direct these questions to specific panelists. But what I'm gonna ask you to do is talk from two perspectives. What are the pluses and minuses from the agency perspective, right? We think about SANDAG, right? What are the pluses and minuses for them? And then what are the pluses and minuses for the user, right? Or the person who is paying that potential tax or fee or what have you. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So I want to start with one of the things that we talked about was usage fees, and the coiner of the term high occupancy toll is Bob himself. And so Bob, would you like to talk about high occupancy toll lanes and these kinds of user fees?
Right. Well, one of the pluses certainly is that they're optional, and you choose to use them, and you decide based on whether the toll at the time is a good value, whether it will save you more in time than the amount you're paying. A negative that some people are sure is true is that these are unfair to low-income people, and yet there's new research from the University of Washington on the hot lanes on I-405 that it turns out that low-income people don't use them anywhere near as often as middle and high-income people, but when they do use them, they actually get more benefits in terms of the value of time saved than the higher-income people do. It's very unusual, not expected result, but it shows that these things sometimes can be counterintuitive. The other thing is there's uncertainty if you use the revenue from a hot lane to finance it. In other words, to issue bonds, to pay for, this is assuming that you have construction costs, as were the case with widening I-15 to expand those express toll lanes. then there's uncertainty as to how much the revenue is going to be. The expert people do traffic and revenue studies, but there's some risk involved in the revenue may not turn out to be as much as you expected. It may turn out to be more, in which case that's great. But so that's definitely a drawback. Something that everyone has to pay is more certain, like the gas tax. And sales tax is like it. Of course, we've seen gas tax and sales tax revenue during the pandemic just drop dramatically, although they're recovering. The gas tax revenues are recovering faster than, let's say, air travel, because it's a lot easier for people to get back in their cars and do they may not be commuting, but they're still making other trips to go shopping and do things.
So thank you, Bob, for sharing some of the perspective there on these particular this setup of like the high occupancy toll lanes. And I know that for folks in San Diego, we're familiar with that because we have that in different parts of our region. I want to take a quick aside though, only because you brought that. You said one of the criticisms, Bob, is that that sometimes folks might consider these kinds of optional setups not particularly helpful in terms of equity, for instance, access for working families, low-income families. You indicated that there's some research that might indicate that's not the case. Let me invite Michael to comment on this. If you have a perspective on whether this is this kind of setup is helpful or hurtful to folks who are low income.
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably see eye to eye with Bob about this. The nature of it being optional suggests that no one is made worse off by this. You know, that you might conceivably, you could argue that you now have given people who have more disposable income a better option to buy their way out of congestion than a lower income household does. But that's I think a broader concern than just something that's confined to the roads, which is that if you have more money, your life is easier, and that's just, it's true. I mean, we should hope that it wouldn't be, but to sort of prevent that from being the case on the road is to sort of have equality at the expense of quality, you know, which is to say that everyone should just be in all these unpriced lanes and miserable together. And as someone who lives in Los Angeles, and occasionally you get stuck in traffic and realize there's a celebrity next to you, there's a certain Schadenfreude that you can enjoy there. Like, yeah, take that, you know. But that's not the kind of thing a government should aim for. We should aim to have good service. And there is not just the more recent research from the University of Washington, but earlier research as well that shows that at different times, people of all different income levels have at that moment a very high value of time, right? And that could be a landscaper who wants to squeeze in one last job before the day's end, and it's extremely valuable for them to avoid congestion to do it. The sort of cliched version is the mother who needs to get to daycare before a penalty kicks in, right? And I don't know how often that actually happens, but it's valuable enough. But the point being that there's a lot of evidence that the intrapersonal value of time differential is much higher than the interpersonal value of time. That higher income people have no monopoly on urgency and being in a hurry, and providing people the option, all people the option for a relatively low cost to get really where they need to go fast is a huge benefit to everybody.
And I think what I hear the two of you saying is that perhaps we should look under the hood on these kinds of things, no pun intended, actually pun was intended, on the impact that some of these things like high occupancy toll lanes have on low-income working families. Only because this is an interesting topic, and I think something that is probably on the minds of everyone who's on the board at Sandag. Let me see if Brianne, you have any thoughts to also add, because Michael and Bob are in Southern California like me, and you're in Maryland, and maybe there's a different perspective from folks on the East Coast.
Right. Well, and I'm actually based in Washington, D.C. I live and work there. So, but it's all, our exploration of these policies is certainly regional in scope. So, definitely relevant there. I think, as it relates to user fees being equitable, it's important to think of both, socio-demographic equality or equity, I should say, as well as geographic equity. That's something that comes up a lot. We mentioned congestion pricing fees specifically earlier. That's something that is certainly relevant to that discussion is how a user charge in that sense would affect people of different geographies. I think something, regardless of what kind of equity it is we're talking about, something that's important to bear in mind is that the current transportation system is hardly equitable, in its effects on different types of road users. The fact that so many people are priced out of cities and have to pay to either own and maintain a car or take transit and spend their time. So maybe not spending as much financially, but spending time taking transit to get into the city. I think that's an important consideration. And, in terms of things like, we didn't ask about this specifically, but thinking about things like gas taxes or sales taxes, these are all things that affect, the payers of them in the same way. And so I think designing, having a system that is, takes into consideration people's ability to pay is very important.
And Brianne, you actually teed up the question I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you to comment on the pluses and minuses of gas and sales taxes. And again, from the perspective of the agency versus the perspective of the person who is paying. You teed it up.
Sure. Yep, I'll kick that one off. So, I think from the perspective of an agency, it is a fairly predictable stream of revenue. I think it's, it's something that can be reliable in that sense, and it's kind of a traditional way that that agencies have approached their funding operations and capital programs. I think from the user's perspective, again, having an ability to provide different options is and so a variety of funding streams is an important thing.
Well, on the gases and sales tax in particular, would you comment further on this? This conversation we're having around equity. Are these types of the taxes? Are these considered regressive, progressive? When it comes to who paying these taxes, sales, in order to get the transportation system?
Sure, I think they are regressive in the sense that, again, it's the same tax for everyone, and so it doesn't factor in ability to pay. It is they can be very targeted towards specific things, so that's the good thing about it. If there is a gas tax, then that is taxing the use of gasoline. And so I think that's the benefit of that approach, is that it is very targeted in the externality that we are trying to price.
Brian, I'll pull in now Michael into our conversation. Can you talk about something that's less familiar with some of us in San Diego, specifically congestion pricing, cordon pricing, right? Where like in Singapore, folks in the 70s, I think it was mid 70s, imposed a fee when you would come into the urban core. London did that in the early 2000s. Can you comment on this, the pluses and minuses from the user perspective?
Sure. So what you described as a cordon charge, like you said, that you draw a boundary around usually like a downtown area, and as you drive across that, you usually pay some sort of flat fee, and that's meant to deter congestion in some way. And Singapore does not do that anymore. Singapore in the late 1990s switched to a form of electronic road pricing. They've actually dynamically priced their freeways, which is a very different idea. But I'll try and speak broadly about this. From an agency perspective, the obvious disadvantage of this is that it is politically often unpopular. This is an extremely transparent price, right? Your decision to drive is matched with an in-your-face charge, right? When you drive under a toll gantry in Singapore, you have a transponder mounted on your dashboard and it flashes and just shows you how much money you lost. And so at the gathering the political ability to do this is difficult if you're not, for instance, Singapore, an island city-state that has been governed by the same party since 1956. The advantage, though, to both the agency and the user is that you have a mechanism now that raises money, but it's not primarily a mechanism of finance, right? It's primarily a mechanism of performance. That the real benefit of a congestion charge is that it actually makes the road work, right? If you took the same amount of money you pay in congestion charges and just mailed it to Singapore's Land Transport Authority, you would have traffic jams. But because you have this dynamic price that's attached to the demand for the road, the real value is that the road actually works, that the government treats the road consumer like someone who deserves a modicum of respect, right? And the beauty of that is that if Singapore then takes the money and burns it in a bonfire, wastes every last bit of it, you still get benefits, right? It's not, I mean, they shouldn't do that. Government shouldn't waste money. But like the main thing that makes a charge like that so different from everything else is that it gives you something that we have never given our public in the United States, right? Which is a reliable road system that actually works. So it's not primarily a mechanism of finance, it's a mechanism of performance.
Well, I think if I can paraphrase what you're saying there, Michael, is that it basically integrates user behavior with resources that you can then utilize to build and manage. Right, it ties these things where we're talking about sales, it doesn't tie to transportation, right? Whereas things like what we just talked about here, or now actually I want to bring in Bob to talk about per mile charges and the pluses and minuses, again, from the agency perspective and also from the user perspective.
Right. Well, from the agency perspective, state DOTs across the country are increasingly worried and alarmed about what's going to happen as electric vehicles become more and more part of the fleet of vehicles that people use, and as federal fuel economy standards keep increasing, which they are about, I'm sure, with the new Biden administration, they'll go back to what the Obama administration put in place, stiffer requirements. So replacing the per gallon gas tax with per mile charges is going to be a big plus in terms of making sure that the revenue keeps growing in pace with the use of the roads. Now, the disadvantages from agencies and elected officials standpoint is that this currently is very unpopular. People believe that a per mile charge is Big Brother in their car, that it has to micromanage the supervision of exactly which road you travel on when, and privacy will be at great risk, and so on and so forth. And also there's a lot of belief among sort of populist aspects of society that this is not going to replace the gas tax. It's going to be an add-on. It's going to just be yet another tax. So there's a huge educational effort needed and a design effort needed to make this a true user charge and not just another tax. So it's a big challenge, but it's something that we really need to face.
Well, thank you there, Bob. And ladies and gentlemen, I think what we're hearing from our panel, right, we started with this inventory of different ways of paying for the transportation system. We talked about the other areas, other choices that governments can make that affect behavior and could introduce more, I'll call them impurities in a system, right? It's like adding little things and making a diamond less clear. Or reducing the quality. Sorry, that's probably not the best analogy, but that's the only thing I can think of as an engineer right away. And then we talked about some of the subsidies that are in the system. I asked our speakers to talk about the pluses and minuses from an agency perspective, and also user perspective on the different kinds of mechanisms of finance for a transportation system. And I know that this is only the first conversation amongst many that you all will have on this plan that the Sandag staff are developing. I know that Hassan will get a lot of questions from me as the head of the Taxpayers Association in San Diego on these matters. So that's what we've talked about in summary. I'm cognizant of time, but before I open it up for Q&A, I do want to address one particular topic. I'm gonna ask each panelist to talk about this. There's a lot of question around whether pre-COVID behavior versus post-COVID behavior is what that's going to look like. And I think I would fail as a moderator if we didn't talk about this with this group of folks today. And I know that no one can predict anything perfectly. And I know that I usually get things wrong. Ask my wife. I usually get things wrong. So I think that let's ask the three of you, our exceptionally brilliant panelists, any thoughts on whether pre-COVID and post-COVID behavior will be the same, different, any predictions? Let me start with, I'll start with Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously going to be some changes. I think that, a lot of firms that were probably initially before COVID hesitant to allow a lot of work from home have now realized that it's somewhat manageable and they'll be a little bit more willing to do it. My guess, right, and this, like you said, it's could easily be wrong about this. My guess though is that we'll return to something looking like normal pretty quickly. If you look at congestion levels on roads right now, they're not as high as they were pre-COVID, but they've climbed back up pretty rapidly. And I think it's important to remember that for all the advantages that Zoom and things like that give a firm, the one thing they don't permit is any form of unplanned interaction, any form of serendipity. And a lot of firms are highly cognizant of the fact that it's unplanned interactions that often generate very valuable ideas. And so I think most places are going to want to get most of their employees back into in-person meetings as soon as it's safe to do so. And that desire for in-person interaction is going to make transportation behavior look more or less like it did before.
Thank you there, Michael. Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
I respectfully disagree with Michael. I think we're going to see some permanent changes. I suspect we're going to see work at home go from 5% of the journey to work statistics to probably 15% or maybe 20% even as things shake out. And you see this already in real estate trends in terms of office space and so forth. I also think there will be some degree of permanent reduction in transit in large vehicles like buses and rail cars. Harder to predict exactly what that's going to be, but I would say off the top of my head, a 10% ongoing reduction would not be unusual. And one key point for all modes of transportation, I know Sandag is working on a long-range plan, but in terms of decisions to be made in the next 5 years, it would be very unwise to commit to major mega projects before some of these post-COVID trends manifest themselves in actual data and behavior. Let's wait and see before we commit to billion-dollar scale projects. It's really prudent to do that since it's so uncertain going forward.
Thank you, Bob. And then Brianne, any thoughts from you or a person in the Washington D.C. Metro, and the one person not in Southern California?
Thank you. So I do think there is certainly a degree of uncertainty moving forward. That's important to keep in mind. But I do think we can start to see certain trends manifesting. We can also use information about anticipated behaviors. So I'm speaking from I attended the Transportation Research Board conference this past January, and that was of course virtual. It's usually a 10,000 person conference held in Washington D.C. So that's one of the changes is a lot of these types of conferences and business travel went virtual this year. But I think, speaking to some of the research insights from that conference, folks that are doing research on, surveying the average American on their anticipated behaviors, which is an imperfect measure, of course. But, just in terms of people's behavior changes through this and what they anticipate to stick in terms of post COVID behavior, an increase in walking. So certainly that's something that's relevant now as many of us work from home, as there's more, just kind of trips by foot. An increase in working from home, but not daily. So I think there is an appetite. I'm, speaking from personal experience on this, but I think, a lot of what research has found is that there is an increased appetite for working from home. We know we can do it. There are some snags, but it is, I'm thinking there have been a lot of improvements in the working from home climate over this year. And as I sort of mentioned before, a decrease in travel for work. So, decrease potentially in traveling to go to conferences. We know we can do some of these things virtually. So again, that's, not necessarily what is going to play out, but that's one potential manifestation. The other thing I'll say really briefly is that, again, leveraging my kind of behavioral science background, is we know that people are more likely to try new things when they have been in a new circumstance. So for example, when people physically move to a new address, they're more likely to change their commute patterns. Just something about, changing your circumstances, your environment, makes people more open to new behaviors. And I think that's something that, as we think about what transportation and our transportation system looks like in the future, I think it's important to recognize that we have this kind of really interesting experiment right now in our ability to explore new opportunities, and that's something that I think would be remiss not to consider.
Gentlemen, I want to say that it's been so great having this conversation with different experts and across the country with different viewpoints. This was, I think we've achieved what I for this, an educational start on the different ways that a plan could be financed and could come together, but all the considerations that need to be dug into, right, as the staff continue the development and work with all the members of the board here in identifying what's important. So I am 1 minute past 10:40 Pacific time, so I'm 1 minute behind schedule. But I'm gonna I know that we promised about 20 minutes of Q&A, so I will turn it back over to Colleen.
Thank you so much, Haney, and what an amazing discussion by the panel, Breon, Michael, and Bob. Thank you. Sorry. Anyway, the concepts that the panel talked about are exactly what has been laid out in the draft funding strategy, which is attachment 2 to your staff report for 8B. So at this point, I will turn it to the chair to entertain any questions and get us back on track on our schedule.
Well, thank you. Thank you to the gentleman and to Breon for that amazing presentation. There were a lot of really interesting information there. We do have a few hands up. So I see that Councilmember Rodriguez has had his hand up the entire time. So we'll start with him.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate having this panel and just really seeking to be as transparent and constructive as possible as we begin long-term planning on our region and look at all sides of the spectrum and how we're going to fund future projects. I think my biggest concern as we move forward is approving budgets and projects and ideas outside of our revenue means. I think we need to be very careful on what we approve and what we move forward on, at the expense of taxpayers ending up footing the bill in the end. And so what I would like to ask the panelists, I believe we're asking the panelists, is how important and what can be done as a board member to ensure that the underlying assumptions that are used to estimate revenues is accurate, because when you look at underlying assumptions, they can be opinionated, they can be steered, they can be manipulated, so to speak. And so when we see a presentation and it says, hey, we're estimating revenues on ridership at XYZ, my default is, well, we've really failed to increase ridership at a level that makes sense to move on more mass transit projects, but we want to, be kind to our environment. We want to, be progressive in our transportation efforts. So my question again is how can we ensure that our underlying assumptions on revenues is as accurate as possible so that we can build within our means in this long-term planning? Thank you.
Well, I will do my best here to farm this out. Let me take the question and also add a little bit to it, if I may ask some of the panelists that I draw in to talk about which aspects of a plan are perhaps most sensitive to change. Maybe that's a way to describe it, right? What are besides the underlying assumptions, but what are the things that are very, very sensitive to change? I'll start with Bob.
Well, traffic and revenue are two things that are related, obviously, and are very often overestimated in both road projects and in transit projects. And researchers who've studied this, like Bent Flivbjerg at Oxford University, have said you really need to have arm's length outside review of these projections by people who are very competent and have no stake in the outcome. And that is I've hardly ever seen that done in US transportation planning. Generally, the forecasts look more like wishful thinking or what people hope would be true as opposed to what's been vetted as being realistically likely. Now, an exception to that is toll projects, although they don't always pan out, as you knew from SR 125 in San Diego, which did not pan out as originally forecast. But the bond rating agencies do very careful reviews of traffic and revenue forecasts for toll projects if they're being financed by revenue bonds. And that provides one kind of external check that can be very, very important as a reality check.
Michael, any additional thoughts? You were nodding. You were not during the question, so thought I'd bring you in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what Bob said is correct. I mean, there's an entire field of literature about what's called the planning fallacy, which is the sort of answer your more specific question, Haney. Almost every aspect of a plan is sensitive if you're only going to look forward. And I think one of the best checks, in addition to, Bob mentioned too, which is one, having a third party who has no material interest in it, and the other being a third party who really has some financial skin in the game, which is what a bond agency would have. But the other thing to do is to really base your estimates on past projects that are very similar in how they performed. The joke in the study of these sorts of forecasts is that somewhere in there's always an implicit or explicit message along the lines of, this time it's different. Every time we've done this before, it hasn't worked, but for this time, for this reason, it will. And oftentimes that's just not true. And one of the most reliable predictors of a current plan is how did similar plans do in the past. And I think it's very telling that it's very rare to look back at past plans when you're evaluating a current one. And that's often because it casts a little bit of a wet blanket over the rosier projections. So I really think paying attention to history is important.
Brian, anything to add in this conversation around underlying assumptions, sensitivities?
Just real briefly, so I like that you started off, Haney, by asking for a range of options, and I think that's a good point to make. Is that not any one of these options is a silver bullet when it comes to financing transportation options. I think it's good to have a mix, and so to be open to trying different things and having a diverse source of funding. That's incredibly important.
Well, thank you, folks, and I'll pass it back over to Mayor Blakespear.
Okay, thank you. So we have at least 5 board members who would like to make questions. So maybe we could move through the answers a little bit faster. So Supervisor Lawson-Remer. Wait, we can't hear you.
Thank you so much, Chair Blakespear. So let me ask the question, and it may be more appropriate for staff to circle back. So it might be that the question won't take much time from the panelists. So I was very interested in the discussion of externalities. And I think what would be helpful, I would like to better understand if we have done any assessments, comparative externalities by modes of transit across our county. And I would be particularly interested, not just in aggregate by mode, but also average and marginal by user. Because I think one of the big takeaways for me here is that it would be very helpful to align revenue options with incentive structures that appropriately have incentivize users to internalize the externalities that they're imposing. So I don't know if this is a question so much for the panelists, but maybe more directed to staff to find out what assessments we've done to quantify these externalities by modes of transit in aggregate and by user, marginal and average, and whether it would potentially be helpful to do additional analysis or share that out in a format that would allow us to look at this from an analytical standpoint.
Supervisor, we have not done a detailed analysis like what you're describing. We certainly have followed a lot of research that's been done across the nation in those areas. I think maybe Michael would have something to add. He's done a lot of research in this area, and we followed a lot of his body of work. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I can't speak to what's been done in San Diego. There is a lot of research, very true, about internalizing externalities. And I think there's a lot of disagreement about, this particular cost of specific externalities, how much a pound of carbon or a certain amount of particulate matter imposes on a cost basis. I do think one nice thing about a congestion charge is that you know when the externality has been cleared because you just set a price that sort of clears the congestion. And in doing so, you also dramatically reduce, although not perfectly reduce, both pollution and crash externalities as well. So I think it's very hard to precisely estimate externalities, but you can do it well enough that you can use a policy instrument to sort of identify it.
Can I just ask one follow-up, just additionally on land value capture, whether we've done analysis locally on strategies around, the question I just asked was on us imposing the cost of externalities on users, but to flip that on its head, have we done any analysis on us capturing the value of externalities generated by our transit investments on surrounding communities?
Supervisor, if I may, this is Hassan. So I think you're bringing up why we needed additional resources to do things right, especially on the data. We have not done this in the past, and we're absolutely going to do it in the future. The question is, like Michael alluded to, can we do it with enough credibility for you to be able to make policies? And that's the attempt here. And I'll be interested in Bob's perspective on this. How to capture land value is actually one of those things that when you look at transit or transportation hubs or mobility hubs, which we have about 30 in the San Diego region, that's probably the most important question to answer. How do you capture that value so you could move with things like public-private partnerships, et cetera? But I'll be interested in Bob's perspective on this.
Well, there's very little actual use of these mechanisms. The problem is most transit systems get built and then think about value capture afterwards. But unless you have a mechanism in place that defines a zone, or let's say around a rail station, of half a mile or whatever it would be, and tell people in advance that as assessed values go up within that zone, the tax rates will go up and the increase will be put into the transportation system. That's hardly, I'm not sure I've ever seen that happen in the United States. I mean, there's little bits of value capture that are put in some respects after the thing's already built, but you don't really capture much value that way. The political process dictates against it because somebody's already there counting on using that for their own benefit. Whereas if it were defined in advance and put into an ordinance or a statute or something, then you would have a much better chance of capturing significant value increases and being able to use them to fund part of the transportation.
And Supervisor, just so you know, for the NAVWAR project, the Central Mobility Hub, that's exactly the analysis we're doing. What would that value of the land be with the transportation hub, and what would it be without transportation hub? And there is a huge difference between the two, and that dictates how the project's going to move forward. So we're experimenting with this, never done this before, but we are going to have to do it if we want to do it right.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Huebner.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So my question is, how do the user fees, which do affect behavior, play into our greenhouse gas reduction assumptions? And then to the panel, are there any academic calculations that speak to this? And to our staff, if so, are we using them in our models now?
I think these would be great. Let's start with the panel members, then we can follow up with the staff responses.
Start off briefly on this one. So, thinking of user fees, if it's a congestion charge, so if that is the specific policy, then the goal should be to reduce congestion. Insofar as there is a congestion reduction, you'd expect to see emissions reductions. And so, that's an important thing to keep in mind. If the policy that's explored is, something like a discount for electric vehicles or lower emissions vehicles, and that's a different policy inherently. And so, I think just thinking about the specific tools is really important. Obviously, I can't speak specifically to the San Diego region, but insofar as, there is a congestion reduction that would, the thought is that would lead to emissions reductions.
Yeah, just in general, if you charge an explicit price for something that does not now have an explicit price, there's going to be less of it used, especially if it's a variable charge, and people will not make trips or will change their trips away from the congested period to avoid paying the higher charge. So you will get some reduction in travel demand, either in time or absolutely. From having that, it goes with the territory.
So the one thing I'd add, I agree with both of the other folks, is that your user fees, most of the prominent user fees will reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. The most obvious one is the gas tax. I mean, that's literally a tax on burning up fossil fuel. So the higher you have that, the less fossil fuel you're going to burn, and the more you'll hasten the adoption of electric vehicles. And I think taxing gasoline is a much better way to hasten the adoption of electric vehicles than offering rebates and discounts and so forth on the electric vehicles themselves. And then with respect to the congestion charge, Matt Barth out at UC Riverside has actually done a lot of research on this using real data from Southern California, and basically demonstrating that, as Brianna suggested, when you have vehicles on a freeway that are moving at between 45 and 55 miles an hour, as opposed to stop and go 12 to 15 miles an hour, over and above a reduced travel demand, you actually get, for that given amount of travel, a lot less greenhouse gas emissions per mile. So there is an effect there.
Staff,
Sandike staff perspective, we do include this in our modeling, and we can probably talk about that more when we move into the data and modeling part of this report. I know our panel, we have a hard stop with them at 11. And so I want to be really cognizant of their time. And I'll turn it back to the chair for other questions.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So the panel does have to leave in 2 minutes at 11. So I'm going to ask the 4 board members to just state your question. I'm going to call on all of you at once. And then if there's any chance to answer the question, then that would be great. But if you could try to make it a question and not a long statement, that would be great. So Councilmember Shu.
Very quickly, how do we capture the externality costs and present that? Because we have a hard sell to sell this $163 billion plan. But I know that the healthcare costs alone by the county health director was estimated to be $1 billion a year from the cost of the pollution of our transportation system. That's just one part of that. How do we pull that in so that we see the $163 billion cost as a bargain, if not a savings to our health and economy? Okay,
thank you. Mayor Jones, for your question.
My question is actually of staff on this topic, so I can wait until the panelists leave. That would be fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Hall.
Yes, did I hear you say we should not make any major investment in transit for at least 5 years?
I said we should not commit to major investments in transit. Maybe 5 years may be a little long. It depends how quickly things settle out and people are eating in restaurants and going to movies and doing all the normal things. And then we see how many of them are actually commuting every day, how many commuting once a week, et cetera. 5 is not a hard number, at least 3 years, I would say, absolutely, before committing.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Salas.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity to have third-party no interest involved in this conversation. And I was really struck by some of the things that Bob had to say relative to paying attention to history and how traditionally transportation projects have not met the mark of revenue estimate of generations. And certainly we experienced that here in Sandag. But, I think that, having that third-party interest, the bond third-party interest, it's looking out for the financial part of it, is absolutely one tool to help us stay on track. However, I think that what the problem here at Sandag was that once it was realized that those projections were not coming through, that the ball was hidden from the board. And so I think that we need some assurances there going forward now that we have an independent auditor. But certainly that trust has to be built with all of us, right, to get over that gap. And that wasn't a question, it was a comment.
Okay, well, thank you so much to the panel. We really appreciate your expertise and your time. And we will respect that it's 11:02 and you have things to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll hand it over to staff to do the staff portion of their panel, and then questions can go to them.
Again, Chair Blakespear, we are going to go now to the data and analytics part of this presentation and go. Oh, excuse me.
Sorry,
Mayor Jones has a burning question.
I do. I have it. Yeah, sorry. So anyway, I'm going to speak from the perspective of residents of the county and how this will affect them. I do have a couple of questions, and you may need to get back to me. My apologies. I couldn't find it in my notes. I knew I had something. So in 2015, we had a $130 billion price tag on the RTP, and I'd like to know how much we have spent total thus far. What projects have not been completed, and then what would that be in today's dollars? So you may need to get back to me on that. But looking at page 15 of the constrained scenario, I'm looking at the new fees and taxes. There are 4 new fees or taxes, which are gas tax, VMTs, HOV on lanes that are currently there, because we're talking about converting lanes that have already been there. And I need to know, because we're talking about 163 billion in 2020 dollars. That's not what it won't be built today. It won't happen in yesterday's dollars. So how much will it actually cost on predicted when those items would be completed and how much that would cost? And so I don't think you can answer these questions right now, which I totally understand. So if you could please respond to those in writing to the entire board, that would be extremely helpful so that we all have the information so that we know what we're even talking about.
Sure, I will do, Mayor, but I do wanna, I mean, I can address your last question. The reason we use today's dollars, 2020 dollars, is there is so much unknown about future expenses, you know, future interest rate, future, etc. So it will be really a stretch to start estimate expenditure year dollar. So that's why we use 2020 for the estimates.
Well, I guess my question would be to then add on to that. If you've got the 2015 dollar amount, and then take that data that shows how much it cost today, I think that might be a way that you could, you know, I know it won't be 100% correct, but just I think it would give us a little bit more reassurance as to what dollar amount we're actually talking about, because when we're trying to tell folks, it's, you know, you're going to pay 4 new fees than you're paying right now today, that's a lot of money. And so how much is that going to cost each person in the county that is part of the, you know, part of our residents? And so I think we need this data to be able to explain it to folks, because otherwise we just won't be able to get the confidence and, you know, be able to explain the equity and how this would work to each taxpayer in our county.
Mayor Jones,
Thank you.
If I may, the 2015, and we're going to go into this in more detail. We want to walk through all those slides about the cost estimates and the comparison of the 2015 plan and the 2021 plan. Both of the cost estimates are based on today's dollars. We wanted to be able to give this board an apples to apples comparison. So that's really important to recognize. And I think that then as we start to go through and talk about these different expenses, it really comes down to we're buying a bigger system, and that bigger system is what is necessary to meet our state and federal mandates, address congestion, and to address social equity. So we really want to dive into the details with all of you and go through all of that data. We're here to be open and transparent about everything. And we really want to make sure that we're giving you, exactly as you're asking, Mayor Jones, the data that you need to make some really important decisions.
Okay, wonderful. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So staff can go forward with your panel.
All right, excellent. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ray Major, who is going to kick us off on the Part A piece of our agenda today.
As we work to develop the regional plan, we've been asked on several occasions for our data. And today, in full transparency, we're making that data available for your examination. On Friday, you received a document with links to extensive list of data that we use in the preparation of this plan. Publishing all of this data is more complicated than just sending a link to a couple of spreadsheet files. Currently, the draft plan is based on data that exceeds 250 terabytes. By comparison, all of the printed books in the Library of Congress can be stored in approximately 10 terabytes. And we expect to generate another 20 to 30 terabytes of data before the final numbers are calculated for this draft plan. I realize there is a tremendous amount of information provided here today, but that's what it takes to do this plan. The use of data and analytics to inform and analyze the results of the regional plan is an art and a science, and it's becoming increasingly complex with each planning cycle. For the 2021 plan, it's even more complex than ever before. We are required to calculate impacts 30 years out on vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions, social equity, congestion, and many other metrics. We're required to analyze specific land use scenarios, the impacts of proposed infrastructure projects, along with a host of funding mechanisms. Simply put, we have never created a regional plan like this before. This effort represents a break from our past. Past planning cycles have been essentially a refresh of a list of Transnet projects. In the past, we used data to validate what we wanted to do. This time, we're using data to help us determine what we need to do. To walk us through the data now available to you, we've brought together a team of Sandag staff for your presentation today. First, we have Allison Wood, Senior Regional Planner and Project Manager for the Regional Plan. Pat Landrum, Director of Data and Modeling, who will talk about the overall model construct. David Tedrow will talk about our growth forecasts and land use scenarios. Dr. Wu Sun will go over some of the key features of our transportation model, also known as the activity-based model, or ABM model for short. And Rick Curry will focus on planning strategies applied in the model and how we evaluate performance in the 2021 plan. And finally, Dr. Cindy Burke will discuss ways that we ensure the quality throughout the process. And I'd like to hand it over to Allison to start with an overview of the planning process.
As Ray said, we use terabytes of data in the planning process. We've provided links to volumes of information in the attachment to your staff report. Documentation includes all related staff reports and presentations, data used to develop the 5 big moves, and inputs to the travel demand model. These inputs include data on existing conditions, travel patterns, land use and forecasting, and details like pricing and parking policies and phasing of strategies. We also included draft outputs from the model. We've given you a lot of our raw data in our spreadsheets, our GIS layers, and notes. As we prepare the draft regional plan, we're synthesizing all of this information into the draft document to be released in May. Using data and developing the plan is iterative, and we start with existing conditions. This data comes from existing land use patterns, travel patterns, and surveys to understand what is working and what is not working with our current system. Next, we look into the future. How will our region grow and change as we look out 30 years? How many people will be living here? And what will that mean in terms of jobs and housing needs? This data comes from our regional growth forecast. The data helps us understand the challenges we need to address and establish our goals for the 2021 regional plan. Our goals are to address congestion, improve social equity, and meet our federal and state mandates related to clean air and emissions. Next, we develop strategies to help us meet our goals. This is where the 5 big moves come in, along with policies like pricing, land use, and zero-emission vehicles. We use the model to test strategies and analyze the benefits and performance. The initial performance results across a number of metrics are provided in the attachment. At critical milestones, we engage our peer review process at Sandag to present and review each key data set, piece of analysis, and methodology used along the way. Input from the public is key to help us validate our data. We've linked to relevant staff reports and presentations that are critical to the public process. And we use this data to develop a network of projects, define the parameters for how services would operate, and phase the projects over time. And all of that information is entered into our travel demand model. These details are available in our online data viewer, where you can see improvements proposed by 2035 and 2050. The attachment to your staff report also includes links to network development reports describing how we've phased investments. Our regional growth forecast and local planning assumptions are used to define the land use scenario for the regional plan. This includes data on population, housing, and jobs estimated today and forecasted for the future. This ties together our land use and transportation planning in a way to maximize greenhouse gas reduction, address congestion, and improve social equity. Policies like pricing, telework, and parking management are applied to the travel demand model. These policies affect how the transportation system is used and are essential for meeting our greenhouse gas target. A complete list of the strategies that have been applied are in the model data input sheet. Now at this point, I'm going to hand it over to our Director of Data and Modeling, Pat Landrum.
Our team will be sharing additional details on the data and information shown in attachment 1 of the board report for item 8A. We're going to be taking a deeper dive into the data-driven 5 Big Moves development process. This process is what was used to derive the inputs and strategies used to evaluate the regional plan through the activity-based model, ABM 2+. The data are centered around 3 primary areas of focus that Allison touched on previously. The first, the data analyses that were leveraged throughout the iterative development process for the 5 Big Moves. We've also provided additional documentation on the methods used during each of the 6 sprint cycles. Each of these sprint cycles included checkpoints along the way to ensure that the data, methodology, and additional parameters were evaluated to ensure that we continue an additional analysis to make sure that we refine along the way. All of the most recent data sets published are available in our public data viewer. And my GIS team recently let me know that all of the cost estimates and phasing information are now available in the viewer. The second focus area is the SCS land use scenario. This includes the forecasted population, housing units, and jobs for each regional plan phase year, and is generally the size of a census block in terms of the data we provided. Draft documentation was also provided that describes regional forecasting and SCS land use scenario development processes. The third focus area is transportation modeling. As Allison mentioned, the transportation networks by phase year, the policy strategies, and draft performance measure outputs are really the key to the data inputs for the activity-based model. A robust set of ABM documentation and source code has also been provided through the links to our ABM 2+ wiki on our GitHub site. The 5 Big Moves development process provided the foundation upon which the key modeling input data and strategies, land use, networks, and policies were further refined by our teams and provided as inputs to ABM 2+. This evaluation is extremely important to ensure the regional plan meets our goals of a faster, fairer, and cleaner transportation system, as well as meeting state and federal mandates, including GHG emissions reductions, federal air quality conformity, and conformance with Title VI. Each of our data and modeling team members will provide additional insights into the data and documentation provided, beginning with the SCS land use scenario, ABM 2+, and how ABM 2+ is being applied to perform this evaluation of each of the integrated components of the 5 Big Moves. Dr. Burke will then provide some insights into our quality assurance and quality control program, which is critical to ensure the accuracy and transparency of the data we acquire, collect, develop, and produce. And Dr. Burke will close with an overview of our peer review process, which ensures we conduct a thorough and impartial review of the assumptions, processes, and methods used in the development of our data and modeling products and services. With that, I'll hand things off to Dave Tedrow to provide an overview of the regional growth forecast process, as well as the SCS land use scenario. Dave?
The regional forecast generates population, housing, and job counts on an annual basis from the current year through 2050. And we create a new version of this forecast in support of each regional plan. The forecast consists of a regional and a sub-regional phase, and key inputs to both include data and various types of guiding parameters, including those previously reviewed with the board, such as housing capacity and vacancy rates. At the sub-regional level, the key inputs are the parcel-based land use data provided by each jurisdiction and maintained and updated by SANDAG. SANDAG reaches out to the jurisdiction, conducting a capacity review to identify housing capacity by parcel and a scheduled development project to identify pipeline projects to include in the forecast. The forecast uses this data, guided by additional mandates, such as the need to adhere to RENA targets and to utilize the latest local plan updates. The process also incorporates strategies from SANDAG planners to focus growth in mobility hubs. Once complete, the process generates housing and population counts by various demographic characteristics, as well as job counts by industry. And it is this data at the MGRA and person level that is used as input into the travel model. I will now turn it over to Dr. Sun to discuss the use of this data in ABM 2+.
Activity-based model, or ABM, is a travel demand forecasting platform used by the majority of large MPOs in the United States. Over the years, SANDAG developed a few versions of ABMs. The version we're using right now in 2021 regional plan is ABM 2+. As you can see in this flow chart, the outputs from the forecast become the inputs to ABM 2+, such as population, households, also known as the synthetic population, which is the base for person-level simulation in ABM 2+. Also from forecast are employment and enrollment, which drive work and school trips. Then there are the roadway, transit, and active transportation networks. On the output side, there are the total number of trips, which represent the total regional travel demand. Travelers' demographic information are attached to each of the trips, such as age, gender, income, and race. And that's where the social equity analysis capacity coming from, the ABM 2+ model. The output also include VMT, mode shares, traffic volume, transit ridership, walk and bike trips. All inputs and outputs can be found in the ABM 2+ wiki website. It is a public-facing website. There's a link provided on this slide and also in the attachment to the board report. So ABM 2+ relies on a discrete loaded choice structure. Dr. Daniel McFadden, the famous UC Berkeley professor, won the 2000 Nobel Prize for his work and research in this field. Underneath ABM 2+ are math and algorithms. Because the math and logic is so complicated, we use distributed and multi-processing ABM 2+ software to solve them. So math are represented by parameters, which are estimated from surveys, such as household travel behavior survey and transit onboard survey. The software itself is open source. All source code and parameters can be found in a public-facing GitHub repository with a link on this slide, and also in the attachment to the board report. To understand what affects travel behaviors, staff performed sensitivity testing to demonstrate effects of various inputs on VMT, mode shares, and other metrics. The work was performed in response to CARB's guidelines for SCS program and evaluation. Test results revealed that housing, population, land use, transportation networks, pricing, and policies all affect how people travel in our region. So planners then use this information and findings to guide them through the planning process. To guide us through the ABM 2+ development, we formed a technical advisory committee, or TAC, composed of 11 national experts in travel demand modeling from FHWA, CARB, major MPOs in California, major MPOs from the other parts of the United States, academia, and private sectors. The TAC experts reviewed ABM 2+ twice in May 2019, and again in early March 2020, right before the pandemic hit. The experts found that Sandex ABM2 Plus is well above state of practice. Some features are state of art, highly praised sensitivity testing, and is ready for 2021 regional plan. So in summary, Sandex ABM2 Plus is one of the premier models in the United States. Many features has been transferred to other regions. For example, the telework model, the newest addition to ABM2 Plus, is being transferred to several other regions. So does ABM2 Plus know everything about the future? My honest answer is no. ABM2 Plus can predict how people respond to cost, time, and many other variables that are reviewed from the survey really well. However, it is challenging to predict how people respond to non-existent and futuristic modes and technologies. This challenge is not unique to ABM2 Plus. It's not even unique to travel demand modeling. Rather, it is a challenge to forecasting in general. The forecasting model has its limitations. It is a tool used to inform and assist the decision-making process. With that, I will hand it over to Rick Curry to talk about ABM2 Plus applications.
The methods for evaluating strategies in the regional plan are discussed in the SCS technical methodology submitted to the California Air Resources Board and provided in the attachment to the board report. In order to evaluate these strategies in the ABM2 Plus, we need to tell it a few things. Where is the strategy applied? Who can use it? How does it operate? And how much does it cost to use? We take this information and we translate them into inputs for the ABM2 Plus. For new infrastructure or transit routes, we will code them into our transportation GIS networks. Pricing strategies such as fares, tolls, or parking costs are added to several locations of the ABM2 Plus, including input files and GIS network attributes. And some strategies, such as the NextOS, just require an input parameter change to reflect the different levels of program implementation. Mobility hub and flexible fleet implementation are applied to geographic areas, whereas others like pooled TNCs, such as Uber and Lyft, are reflected in the mode choice algorithms. Telework is applied in a specific long-term choice model. The evaluation of the regional plan scenarios are done in the ABM2 Plus using 20 servers. Each run takes approximately 40 hours to complete, and it produces over 100 gigabytes of data. But not every strategy is evaluated by the ABM2 Plus. We also have additional tools that are used after a model run is complete that are known as off-model tools or calculators. We use these off-model tools for van pool, car share, and the EV charging program to evaluate the amount of GHG reduction those strategies will achieve. Those tools, the off-model tools, were vetted and adapted by UC researchers for use in the regional plan. Performance metrics are used to evaluate whether the regional plan is meeting the fast, fair, and clean goals established. The majority of the performance metrics use one or more of three key different data categories: travel distance and time, travel volume, and travel cost. For example, VMT is a combination of travel volume and travel distance. Now, while this seems straightforward, most planners at Sandag dread asking the modeling team for what seems like a simple metric, because we'll always follow up with 20 questions. Some of those questions might include, well, do you want it for transit or for walk and bike? Do you need commute trips or all trips? Do you need it broken down by social equity communities of concern? Do you want to look at just residents or include other travelers, such as cross-border trip makers? These questions or filters are critical in making sure that the metric fits what you truly want to measure. Now, we also do feed these same data points into our other tools, such as CARB's MFAC model that gives us GHG and other pollutant outputs. The code and some of the documentation of these metrics are provided in Sandag's public-facing GitHub repository. I caution, though, that this process is complex. We use Python programs to run a series of SQL database queries that extract and transform the ABM2+ model results into these discrete metrics. It's really not for the faint of heart. Also provided in the attachment to the board report are the preliminary draft regional plan performance results. Some of these results were shared by Ray Major on February 12th. Here I list a few of the primary performance measures that look at both the positive impacts, such as the access to opportunities and basic needs, and also some of the negative impacts of the regional plan, such as GHG emissions. And now Dr. Burke will discuss how we ensure data quality.
You're muted.
Dr. Burke, you're muted.
All right, thank you. So as the previous presenters shared, a lot of information goes into the data. And for the past 4 years, prior even to the Plan of Excellence being implemented by the board, we've really tried hard to take extra steps to improve processes that were already in place, as well as adding new processes to make sure our data are as valid and reliable as they possibly can be. This includes, in the Plan of Excellence, we had 35 steps that we intended to take control over and try to change and implement. One of the 8 areas of those 35 steps included 7 under data governance. And I'm going to be talking today about our peer review process and our QA. If you can go to the next slide. So these are the 2 processes. They are independent from the modeler and the forecasting groups because we wanted to have that independent review, the peer review process and the Office of QA and QC. So what is a PRP? A PRP is a formal mechanism to ensure data analyses, reports, and other information are compiled in a valid, reliable, and easy to understand way. Now, we have 4 different levels of a PRP, and this does speak to what our expert panel talked about having people come in from the outside. That's our highest level, a tier 4, and we have had a number of those where we've had experts come in, and we really want them to critically look at what we're doing. If there's different data that could be used, we want them to say, are we using the right data? If there are assumptions, do they agree with the assumptions we've made, and are they clearly described? If the analysis are done, many times very complex, as the modelers and Dave indicated, Wu and Rick, we want to know if they agree with how we've done that. And then if there's limitations to the data, we want to make sure that we're clearly describing that. We want to make sure that everything is accurate as well as transparent. Tier 1, 2, and 3 are usually typically within our agencies or with our partners, but regardless of which tier PRP that we do, information is shared ahead of time so that it's not just a check in the box. We make sure everything is saved in a way that if anybody wants to see it or go back to it, we take copious notes that are public record. We document what action items are going to be, and then we share that with the individuals who were in the PRP as well as other relevant staff to make sure that that information can be acted upon and implemented. So what have we done so far since we started our PRP process? Since March of 2017, we've completed 123 PRPs. The PRP picture to the right is obviously prior to COVID, when we were looking at performance measures for our federal regional plan. 65 of those 123 were related directly to the regional plan. 12 of our PRPs have been the tier 4, the most highly rigorous expert panels, and the different PRPs that we've had that are related to the regional plan have looked at revenue estimates, forecasts, the models, off-model calculators, as well as performance measures and performance monitoring. Turning to the QA process, this again is independent of the staff who's creating the data so that we have a level of independence. And this is a dedicated team of data analysts who are very highly skilled in the same types of programs that our modelers and our forecasters are using, are Python, SPSS, SQL, and GIS. And they go in and they want to look at the data. They want to ensure the validity, the reliability. They check the inputs and the outputs. We check if analyses are done correctly. And it is, as we've mentioned before, an iterative process where we document a test plan of what we're going to be doing. We document what we're finding in that QA process. Are the results valid, consistent? Are they aligned and meeting statutory requirements and parameters as needed? And then we may do multiple stages of the review. And again, we do a closeout memo at the end. So again, everything is documented and can be accessed as we move forward. And our stats of what we've accomplished in the QA/QC area, just in 2020 and 2021, we've had 68 reviews, 24 of those related to the regional plan. The bullet list there, again, shows just like with the PRPs, the different topics that we've looked at, the data that we've looked at. And I'd like to also note that this is really not something that we have a set procedure. We are continually striving to improve. There's always more we can do to make sure that we're trying to catch any data error or misunderstanding that could potentially occur. And those have included implementing new processes for when we work in Excel, the spreadsheets to provide clarity, traceability, and reduce potential error, improvements to SQL query logic, establishments of new techniques for the quality control of smaller geographies, and then also establishing project charters and checklists. So we're very committed to this. The process just doesn't stop once the first data is done. We want to make sure everything that we are using to make regional planning decisions is of the utmost quality, validity, reliability, and again, transparent. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ray.
Presentation just scratches the surface of the analysis that we are performing here at Sandag. As you heard, the highly iterative process of calculating the numbers for the plan is quite extensive. It requires many different disciplines to collaborate, including regional planners, experts in state law, social equity, climate and environmental planning, land use, transportation, and finance. These experts work together with demographers, economists, forecasters, and modelers who apply their computational expertise to calculate the numbers that are required to submit the regional plan to the state of California and federal agencies. We realize that there's a lot of data here and the models are quite complex. And we are willing to meet with any board member to explain in detail any part of the process or the data that we use. I'd like to now hand it over to Colleen to go through the part A or part B of the presentation, and then we will take questions at the end.
Thank you, Ray. Now that you have seen all the data and have a general understanding of how complex the data is that we utilize to put together a plan and how we iterate back and forth using the data, helping to move the plan forward, use what comes out of the model again, and iterating back and forth. It gives you a sense of how complex this is. And I can't tell you how much we would appreciate any opportunity to sit down with any of you and have a discussion about any of the questions that you might have regarding the data. So now we are going to move into the funding of the plan. I think you've all heard the price tag we're talking about here. It's $163 billion. And you've heard Hassan say it a lot of times. It's a lot of money. And that's why it's so important that we share all the details with you, because it's important for you as well as the members of this region to understand what it is that we are asking them to pay for. So let's bring up the slide that shows the two pie charts, the one that Mayor Jones pointed out at the very beginning. We can compare what's been done before in the 2015 plan and what we're talking about today in the 2021 plan. As you look at this, one of the things I wanted to point out, we had in August talked about a price tag of $177 billion. And that has been refined over the last several months as we've gone through the iterations in the planning process. We removed one large infrastructure project, and we also really sharpened our pencils on the right-of-way needed for the complete corridors. And so that in collection amounted to about $14 billion. And that's how we now have the price tag of $163 billion. Okay. Okay, so as we look at this, I want to just express a couple of large differences we have. The big difference you see on the two pie charts is the change in the capital investments. You see a substantial, I think it's a 38% increase in capital investments. That's going from 60, what is it? Can you move it down? It's going from $63.7 billion in the 2015 plan to $87.7 billion in the 2021 plan. This increase is the result of rethinking the infrastructure investments, which include higher speed commuter rail and a fully connected managed lane system. Additionally, there's a 20% increase in operations expenditures to support the larger transit and managed lane system. There's also a 50% increase in programs for things like commuter incentives, active transportation, affordable housing, and mobility hub development. Now let's do a cost estimation comparison. So let's just pause here. I want to make sure we get the right slide up that shows the cost estimation comparison by category for the 2015 plan. So let's get this, because this is really important that everyone understands what it is here that we're talking about. The categories in the plan are sorted in this chart. Okay, so the categories in this chart are sorted from largest to smallest in terms of expenditure. The green bars represent the anticipated cost by category in the 2021 regional plan. Focusing on the major differences, you can see a big increase proposed in transit capital, doubling our investment from $25.9 billion in the 2015 plan to $15.5 billion in the 2021 plan. There are also significant increases in freeway operations and maintenance expenditures, increasing from $10 billion to $18.6 billion. And there are some new areas of expenditure that did not exist in the 2015 plan. We're proposing $500 million for goods movement, $4.8 billion for transit fare subsidies. This is for youth and low-income populations, $5 billion for mobility hubs and flexible fleets, and $200 million for the next operating system. Okay, so that gives you a sense of what it is that is proposed in the plan and the cost estimation. Now moving to the funding side. This slide shows the anticipated revenues by funding strategy used in the 2015 plan. The majority of the revenues, 53%, come from state and federal formula funds and Transnet revenues. Now shown in the green bars in the 2021 plan, these same revenue sources represent only 38% of the total funding. You'll notice that the 2021 plan proposes larger increases in other sources, including road user charges. This is what our panel was talking about, the vehicle mile fee, a potential future local sales tax measure, and managed lane tolls. There are several new categories of revenue that were not considered in the 2015 plan. They include future potential fees on rideshare and future regional vehicle miles traveled fees. Okay, next let's talk about the funding strategies, really comparing them. This table provides information on some of the key revenue sources, comparing the 2015 plan to the 2021 plan. And what you'll see is that many of the funding strategies are similar. We're just looking at adjustments to them or increases to them. So in the 2015 plan, we assumed a 1/4-cent sales tax adopted sometime in the future. It is estimated that this would have generated $7 billion. In the 2021 plan, we're assuming a 1/2-cent regional sales tax and 1/2-cent MTS service area sales tax, which together are anticipated to generate $18 billion. Next, a new fee placed on transportation network companies would generate an estimated $2 billion for the 2021 plan. Transportation network company fees, it's a new category this time around that would apply to rideshare companies, which contribute to vehicle miles traveled in the region. This fee is similar to programs we see in other jurisdictions like San Francisco implementing programs like this to address road congestion. Road user fees have been included in both plans. The 2015 plan included a statewide fee of 1 cent per mile. The 2021 plan includes a 2 cent per mile statewide mileage fee, as well as a 2 cent per mile regional fee expected to generate $16 billion. Overall, this strategy supports a transition from dependence on gas taxes, just like you heard from our panel discussion, to fund transportation and offers a locally controlled source of funding to address local priorities. State housing revenue for transportation is a new funding stream based on 2019 state legislation and is assumed to start in the plan in 2026. And this would contribute about $4 billion for regional investments. We see a significant bump in revenue from managed lanes through a larger expanded regional network. The revenues generated could be used to support capital and operation costs of the entire transportation system, including transit and active transportation. We expect a $12 billion revenue increase for a total of $13 billion as compared to the 2015 plan. Finally, $8 billion in state high-speed rail revenue was removed from our assumptions in the 2021 plan as the San Diego segment now falls beyond the horizon year of the 2021 plan. There is no easy answer on how to fund a transportation system that addresses our region's major challenges. And just as we heard from panelists, there is no silver bullet. It requires a combination of strategies. What we have put together today represents the latest thinking in the state of the practice. And we believe this strategy can be accepted by the federal agencies as a path forward. And I'd like to pause just for a moment here. There is a federal requirement that the regional plan include a financing strategy. We're required to include that to show our federal agencies a possible scenario of how we could bring this to fruition. Once the federal agencies approve this as part of our plan, it allows our region to continue to receive critical federal transportation funding. Like the 2015 plan, like the 2015 plan had to include a federal mandated strategy. That strategy was part of the plan and approved by this board of directors in 2015. One of the things that we need to really keep in mind here is that a lot of work will be needed to bring any of these strategies to fruition. That is something we heard loud and clear from the panel, that we need further studies. There needs to be enabling legislation. Many of these would require voter approval. All of these things that would be necessary would require further board input, a public debate and discussion. The strategy we've laid out before you today and included in more detail in attachment 2 of the staff report allows us to meet our federal mandate for the regional plan and gives us a place to start a discussion. If today's discussion wasn't enough information for you, we have several workshops like this plan to ensure that we are sharing all the details of the draft plan before we release it in May. On April 9th, we will be sharing details and assumptions around technology and how the next operating system really works. On April 23rd, we'll go through the social equity analysis and the planning framework that will be used going forward to ensure equity is at the forefront of everything we do. On May 14th, we'll focus on how the regional plan supports your local planning efforts and our shared goals around climate, housing, and mobility. And finally, on May 28th, we'll present the draft 2021 regional plan and ask that you release it for public input. After we release the draft plan this spring, we'll release a draft environmental impact report for public review and comment this summer. We're planning for many opportunities to engage the residents of this region over the summer to incorporate feedback. And we will ask this board to consider adoption of the regional plan and certify the environmental impact report this fall. That concludes our presentation for today. The team and I look forward to your comments, questions, and input. And I'll turn it back to you, Chair Blakespear.
Well, thank you very much, Colleen, and all of the staff. I just want to recognize how much work goes into putting these kinds of presentations together and say thank you for all of your hard work. I know it's been a heavy lift and you've been working on it with dedication for months. So thank you so much for that. And I also just want to mention that we'll also be having sub-regional meetings where the electeds can meet and hear from staff about the specific systems and projects that are in their sub-region so that you will have a better understanding and a deeper understanding of what is happening in the area that is closest to you. So with that, I'm going to call on our board members. I see at least 4 hands up so far. So we have Mayor Gasterland. I know we also have several public comments. So just so people are aware of that.
Great, thank you. Thank you both, well, to all the presenters for a terrific presentation of this. I spent an hour and a half yesterday evening with Ray Major's team, so they answered a bunch of my technical questions, but I didn't realize that there was a GitHub. So during the presentation, I got into the GitHub to look at the input and just see, if I want to recreate this analysis, what does it take? How do I do it? And what I want to point out is that the original analysis started with initial data sets. And those data sets came from census data, survey data of people, employment data. So it'd be really great to have the links to exactly what those data sets were so that somebody could then check or look at the derived data. And I believe that the basic object unit in the derived data is probably trips derived from the census and the employment data. So if we look at that, we ask the question, what are the employment centers and who's there? And if we go to the report about employment centers, the first thing I do is look at the data I'm familiar with. So I see Del Mar. I see that the fairgrounds is included with Solana Beach and not Del Mar in the light purple outline for the tier 4 employment centers. And I see that Del Mar has 3,128 employees, which is more than the number of voters in Del Mar. So I kind of like to understand how employees are assigned to the Del Mar circle, purple circle. And if the purple circle that includes Del Mar does not include the fairgrounds, then what is that 3,128 number? And are the fairgrounds employees associated with Solana Beach in this analysis, or are they associated with Del Mar? So I offer that as an example of the kind of drill down that I'm sure every single board member is going to want to do. And by the way, I'm happy to talk with individual board members if you want to think about your city. For example, Lemon Grove, I'd love to compare Del Mar and Lemon Grove. So I'll leave it with that. 3,128 is the number of employees next to the Del Mar purple circle. Del Mar purple circle doesn't include the fairgrounds. So what's going on? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Huebner.
Really fast question. I see the road usage fees include local and state roads. So it's not just the freeways that will be charged, it's all of our roads completely, or are they only charged sometimes during congested periods?
Excellent question, Mayor Huebner. And so what we're talking about is that there would be a statewide road user fee, and in addition to that, a regional road user fee. Exactly where that would be applied, it might be on some of the same roadways. That is where further analysis would be required to make that determination. It's more about, it's not on the roadways, but it's how many miles you travel. And so 2 cents would be part of the state program, and another 2 cents would be part of a regional program. So it's not necessarily the roadways, but the number of miles an individual drives their vehicle.
So some of the money is going to the state, which would then come back to us. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank
Are we
you.
asking questions and getting them answered? Because my question didn't get an answer.
I mean, your question was very specific to your city, and I think we
Well,
are
give
trying.
it as an example. So it's really a question of what is the employee number associated with each of the cities in the employment tiers? You know, I'll be very general at that level.
Can I answer that question?
quickly? Yes, please do.
I can. When we take a look at employment, there are certain areas, Del Mar is one of them, where there's more employment than there is residents, and that's because there are more businesses in Del Mar. So there's a net inflow of people who work in Del Mar. That also happens in places like the city of San Diego. Other places have a net export of people, if you will. So for instance, El Cajon has fewer jobs because many of the people who live there would be going other places to work, primarily to the city of San Diego. So a lot of this has to do with the inflows and outflows of jobs. So the workers in the are a different number than necessarily the people who live there. So it's not correlated with population. In terms of the Del Mar Fairgrounds, that's something that we can take offline if we could, to discuss exactly how the boundaries are drawn, and we could talk to you about that later.
Okay, thank you very much. Mayor Minto.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to ask some questions. I've been around here for a while, and this is very interesting discussion. It's so complex. I know that when you say there's a lot of data and you go into thousands of terabytes, and we're expected to maybe go through all that, I think that's nearly impossible. I think it's impossible for the public to go through it also. There are some people that maybe will spend hours and hours going through it, but I think it's important for us to have as much information that we can get in these meetings. And I do appreciate today's presentation. There were some things that I picked out, and what I heard today was an awful lot about lessons learned. And those of you on staff that have been around for a while, you will remember the modeling that was done years ago, mistakes that were made. Folks were maybe not forthcoming with, saying to the boss, hey, we found some mistake, and it caused today what we have, the reason why we have AB 805, for instance, and some distrust amongst many community members. And it had to do with, obviously, cost modeling. I think some of you will remember that. Today, we're talking about use of the word today's dollars. And in those previous iterations, I guess, of this, we talked about dollars 40 some years out. And we found out that you could never be that accurate with 40 years in the future on how much money is going to be spent. So I think that's important to talk about today's dollars, and then do what we can to figure out maybe what the increase will be over the time, because that's important to understand. Most people understand today's dollars. And so that's why I heard things today like a lot of the words transparency. And the reason why I think we are using those words, because we thought we were being transparent at one time, but found out it didn't really work out that way. And now we want to make sure that everybody knows that we're being as transparent as we could. So I really appreciate the use of that word. And I like the discussion about we're looking for data errors, because that's what caused problems in the past, is data errors. And then we're talking about subregions. And I know I'm going through kind of a few things here that I've picked out specifically, but the reason why is because I've been here for a while. I know Mayor Hall's been here for a while. When Todd was here a few years ago, he probably heard some of these same words, but we never really got the full report on them and what was happening. And so today we are getting that. and we're able to make a better decision on what we're going to be looking at for the future and what's good for the region. The only thing I think that for me I have to do now is start deciding on what kind of price tag I'm willing to vote on, and how expanded the project is that we're going to be working on. And so, as my colleagues, the only reason why I talk about this is because, you know, we can't get too far in the weeds, because I think staff is down there pretty well, and they need to trim the weeds and find a path for us to go so that we can make some good decisions. So overall, I just want to say thank you very much for the great report, and keep in mind all those buzzwords that we're talking about here, how important they are to make sure that people can trust us and we can trust each other on the work that's going to be done. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And before we go to our last board member comment from Councilmember Rodriguez, I just want to ask the clerk how many public comments we have.
Thank you, Chair. We have 5 hands raised at the moment.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Councilmember Rodriguez.
Well, wonderful. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
We can now.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Thank you for taking my question. I know we're just looking at this from a 30,000 foot view, and we have a lot to go through, and I plan on spending a lot of time with staff and on these reports, just so when I make a decision, it's informed and I can go back to Oceanside and voters and explain, you know, and justify my decisions. I think we're all going to be accountable to that at some point in the future. My biggest concern is, you know, we have a lot of state policies surrounding climate change, surrounding housing, you know, RENA, and a lot of those state policies, they're unrealistic. They're not being met by any jurisdiction in the state of California, including the climate, you know, the climate policies. There's not one jurisdiction that is on point or has met those standards, and so we're chasing a goal that no one else is able to accomplish. Not that we shouldn't do everything in our power to you know, to do our part on climate change, but if our goalpost is so unrealistic and we're looking at numbers this astronomical, that greatly concerns me. You know, from my perspective, and you know, and look at other, I mean, budget to be cut in half, the conversation realistically. So I'm just, but we have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of variables. And at some future point, I would like to have the discussion of an outside third party, you know, individual or organization that could look at what staff is saying and projecting and say, yeah, this looks good. I really think we need to do that with how big and how much risk is on the line. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We're going to hear from the public members, and then we'll hear from Mayor Vasquez. So let's go ahead and call the public.
Thank you, Chair. We have 7 members of the public who would like to speak, starting with David Grubb, and David will be followed by Gretchen Newsom. David, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and start whenever you'd like. David, you're currently self-muted. If you could go ahead and unmute yourself, you have 3 minutes.
Good morning, Chair Blakespeare and board members. I'm David Grubb, Transportation Chair of Sierra Club San Diego, a member of the Quality of Life Coalition. We would like to start by thanking your staff for the many presentations on the data they've been using to drive the plan and for making it available on their website. That helped us to understand their thinking as they developed the plan and to have some good discussions with them about details of the plan. You have heard a lot today about cost estimates and funding strategies. It's clear that building a modern, effective transportation system for the region sounds expensive, but we believe it is a good investment in the future because it will more than pay for itself in the long run in economic development And because for each local dollar we invest, it brings in more than $2 of state and federal money. And a lot of that money circulates in the region as payrolls and support of local businesses. And the final reason that we have to change the way we think about transportation funding is that shifting the balance of funding more towards transit and active transportation is essential to meeting state greenhouse gas reduction goals and supporting local climate action plans. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Next is Gretchen Newsom, and Gretchen will be followed by Jonathan Yellen.
Members of IBEW Local 569. Just want to thank staff for these very valuable updates. The 5 Big Moves envisions a transformational world-class transportation system for our region, and this new direction is long overdue. The hyper-focus on highways and roads that dominated Sandag's past thinking for so long means that San Diego has fallen behind other major cities in terms of a modern, convenient transit system. Until we change course and make the kinds of bold investments required to carry us into the 21st century, we will continue to fall behind. It is well documented that investments in transit bring benefits to communities for years to come. And these are exactly the smart investments we need if we are going to provide people with real alternatives to driving, solve our climate crisis, and reduce air pollution, and starting with our environmental justice neighborhoods. For these reasons, we urge the board to move forward with the kinds of strong investments required to deliver a modern, sustainable, and equitable transportation system for the region that creates quality jobs for local workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Gretchen. Next up, we have Jonathan Yellen, who will be followed by Miguel Aguirre.
Hi, thank you for taking my question, and thank you to Sandag and the elected officials for all the hard work that's going into this. My question relates to the sources of funding for the various budget projects that are being contemplated here. And I note that in the projected 2021 plan, there's approximately 1.7 billion allocated to private investment as a source of capital, which is up only slightly on a relative basis from where it was before. And it strikes me that relative to the total amount of spending needed here, that's a very small amount of private investment that's being contemplated, especially when we think about how government finances will be affected by the economic downturn that we've just experienced, and obviously how that may affect people's willingness to spend tax dollars in that fashion or user fees. So I guess my question is, and sorry, one last point. I also note that I know Sandag has hired consultants to advise them with respect to public-private partnerships. And so as it relates to private investment and public-private partnerships, is there any further work that is going on by Sandag and various entities that would potentially consider that being a larger source of the funding than is currently contemplated with the $1.7 billion number, which is less than 1% of the total costs?
Thank you, Jonathan. And next we'll have Miguel Aguirre, followed by Noah Harris.
Yes, hello again, Miguel Aguirre, Grand Central West Border Fusion Group. It's been a very interesting morning listening. I believe and admire all the transparency comments shared by the board. Collectively, we should be trying to ground high-level economics and strategic narratives which can help illuminate the long-term stealth of our region. Sandag's bold transportation planning is critical for all its population, which is binational in nature, and therefore presents opportunities for thinking way outside the box versus progressive taxing and fine increases to locals alone. I think a bold border policy contributes to meeting the federally mandated finance strategy. The US absolutely needs Mexico in order to compete with China globally. Border-wide, our countries enjoy approximately 1 million people crossings daily. Our region should be competing along with Texas mega regions, El Paso Juarez, Laredo and Nuevo Laredo, and Brownsville, Matamoros, in becoming a more competitive North American trade bloc. SANDAG can lead locally by systematically linking and or federally leveraging, for example, through trade or tariffs, a funding strategy for development of cross-border regional mobility models that will unleash the true socioeconomic potential of our Cali Baja mega region. This will help advance U.S. trade leadership in the world. Indeed, San Diego Tijuana has the potential, and our leaders have a responsibility to develop an incredible North American Pacific Rim showcase in a value-added socioeconomic platform. As SANDAG finalizes its RTP, the border is being considered like never before, yet still largely as a pass-through or get-across process, serving economies away from the border and mostly outside our region. Think about it, manufacturing for big trucks, rail, and shipping headed somewhere else. Even CBX, in essence, is a two-way portal beyond our region. By default, due to costly border wait times, San Isidro Tijuana cross-border districts must become more effective versus pass-through efficient. In other words, if Otay Mesa is macroeconomic, San Isidro Tijuana should be microeconomic, and public infrastructure more people-centered for wielding an international strategic sense of place. Such urban branding will attract global best practices, investment, creative industries, and a value-added innovation culture. It does not have to be a zero-sum game. By strategically formulating the binational relationship where inherently it is strongest and most authentic, our mega region can become galvanized, more productive, and economically secured in facing outside threats. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miguel. Next is Noah Harris, who will be followed by Nicole Burgess.
Good morning, board members. This is Noah Harris with Climate Action Campaign, speaking in support of today's updates on the 2021 regional plan. I want to begin by emphasizing that the most up-to-date climate science says that we must achieve zero carbon by mid-century to stave off the most devastating impacts of the climate crisis. Transportation accounts for nearly half of our region's emissions, which is why we applaud SANDAG for seeking to make much needed investments in transit, active transportation, in a future that is more connected, equitable, and goes above and beyond state climate law. On pricing and funding, we urge the board to include youth opportunity passes, no-cost transit passes for youth 24 and under. YOP is an essential investment that community members have been calling for a decade, and they will increase access to education, activities, and employment for our youth. Next, we want to urge this board to prioritize RTP funding for moving the tracks inland and off the Del Mar Bluffs immediately. Given the recent collapse, it's clear that SANDAG cannot wait until after catastrophe to protect the crucial low sand corridor. Finally, on data, we want to urge board members to ensure that the models informing the plan carefully integrate GHG and VMT estimates from 2020 so we can accurately track real proactive progress towards our climate goals, as opposed to reductions coming from the pandemic and economic recession. Thank you.
Thank you, Noah. Next is Nicole Burgess, who will be followed by Carol. Carol will be our last public speaker.
Good afternoon, SANDAG and fabulous panel and leadership. Great discussions and valuable comments. Happy Friday to all of you, and thank you for Friday. Hop on a bike, ditch the car, learn what your neighborhoods are all about, because we can all thrive and be resilient and enjoy the ways we move. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Next, we have Carol, who will be our last public speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Carolina with the Environmental Health Coalition. I want to thank the staff for the extensive report. I know how difficult all of that could be. We're here to ask that the board ensures that the financing plan gives priority to environmental justice communities and our proposed solutions to be included in the regional transportation plan. We know that the climate disaster is here. It is urgent that we reduce air pollution and gases that are warming up the planet. We don't have a choice anymore. The good news is that we could do this by transforming our transportation system, more specifically, making transit available to our communities, especially environmental justice communities, because we know that right now, 70% of the jobs are not reachable by transit in the region. The majority of transit riders in San Diego come from low-income households. 3 out of 4 bus riders are transit dependent. Approximately 69% of residents in San Diego County live and work in different cities. We worked together with Mid-City CAN, City High CDC, San Diego 350, and CPI to put together what we call our 10 big moves to transportation justice. And we hope that the financing plan includes them. So the #1 priority would be to ensure that environmental justice communities are at the center of the regional transportation plan, that the plan funds a reliable bus system. And we know that MTS is the one that administrates or manages the bus system in our region, in our environmental justice communities. But we need to make sure that they get the funding to be able to do this. And that's going to happen through the regional transportation plan. We need a Blue Line Express. We need 24-hour service. We need a Purple Line that goes through City Heights. We're concerned about the proposed alignment. We need the youth opportunity bus passes. We also need funding that supports a faster implementation of the innovative clean transit rule to transition to clean buses. We need to normalize a plan that has anti-displacement strategies. Our transit system needs bathrooms, and we also need to ensure that the transit system has an emergency ready plan, especially for environmental justice communities when we encounter natural disasters. Finally, we ask that you ensure that these priorities are included in the financing plan, and we look forward to continue to collaborate with the RTP team. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. And Chair Blakespear, that concludes the public comments.
Okay, thank you very much. We now go to Mayor Vasquez.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to voice a few concerns regarding carpool lanes. And so I believe that people who carpool should not have to pay to use HOV lanes, regardless of whether it's a heavy use time or not. We need to incentivize carpool lanes. No new lanes except HOV lanes. This includes the 52, the 78, the 94, and the 67. These lanes can be prioritized for carpooling. This can happen by limiting HOV drivers once these lanes become congested or full. Carpooling should be rewarded. This will help to get more cars off of the roads. And those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Gloria.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know we are maybe beyond our hoped for time, but I wanted to just make a couple of quick comments. Number one, obviously appreciation to staff for this exhaustive presentation, and that is not a complaint. That's a compliment. Something of this magnitude should be dealt with the level of specificity that staff has done. Leave it to us board members to carve out the time. No one of us were forced to run for office. We should do the work to make sure that we understand what this plan entails and what we are asked to consider. For me, I wanted to set expectations. My goal is that we create a system that works for everyday people, that makes real choices when it comes to transportation, and it helps our cities and our region hit our climate action plan goals. I want to just acknowledge the fact that the data in this presentation is unprecedented in its level of detail. And I appreciate that. I also want to make sure that this data is complementary and helpful to cities like mine as we develop our own climate action plans, or in our case, update our plans. I know staff is committed to continue to work with our planning director and others to make sure that the data Sandag is using helps us to do our city level work. I just want to reiterate that here in this forum. Also on the cost methodology, reminder that this is a multi-decade plan. These are funding strategies, not specific actions at this point. And obviously all of us will reserve our opportunities in the future to weigh in on any particular proposal. Lastly, I just always want to point out that this level of funding and these kinds of projects are wonderful opportunities for economic development and generational career opportunities. I'm glad that Sandag has a strong commitment to that, and I look forward to seeing how that plays out as the further development of this plan. Again, Chair, forgive the additional time for these comments. I just appreciate the chance to weigh in on this discussion item, and recognizing that we have a relatively quick timeline in terms of when we have this back at the board, looking at the draft EIR and the eventual adoption and certification of the EIR. And so I encourage our fellow colleagues to avail themselves of the chair's offered sub-regional meetings. I think those will be really critical to get the specificity on projects and in our various jurisdictions. Chair is very generous, I think, to create those opportunities. I hope people will avail themselves of that as we work toward the fall adoption of this plan. So thank you for those allowing me this time, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you for those comments, and thank you to all of the board members who commented, and also to the public and to our incredible staff for all the work that went into that. So we will now be adjourning this meeting until March 26th at 9 a.m., which is our next meeting. So with that, we are adjourned.